Inside a typical high school cafeteria, the protagonist was slumped over a table, completely out of it, until his friend approached with 2 trays of lunch. The heavyset boy assumed Gavin was just exhausted from staying up too late chatting with a girl, so he tried to wake him up to eat. As the delicious scent of the food reached him, Gavin slowly regained consciousness, his eyes lighting up the moment he realized a meal was sitting right in front of him. Without wasting a second, he began tearing into the food with the ferocity of a wild animal. Yananiel tried to warn him to slow down so he wouldn't choke, but the warning came too late. Gavin had already finished his own meal and proceeded to devour his friend's lunch as well. After stuffing himself, the protagonist let out a long sigh of relief, exclaiming that he finally felt like he had returned to the land of the living. When his confused friend jokingly asked if he was a hungry ghost, given that he had eaten both portions, Gavin confirmed that he had indeed been reincarnated after starving to death in a frozen apocalypse. Yananiel, however, couldn't make sense of this, and simply concluded that Gavin was acting crazy because of a recent breakup. Ignoring the skepticism, the protagonist placed a hand on his friend's shoulder and expressed how glad he was to see him alive, saying they now had a chance to start over. Creeped out by the strange comment, Yananiel reminded him that being alive was normal. Gavin then asked for the current date, and upon learning it was August 8, 2020, he revealed that the world would enter a severe ice age with temperatures dropping to -50 degrees in just 2 weeks. Thinking his friend was speaking nonsense, Yananiel dismissed the warning but still offered to help if Gavin was in some kind of trouble. Taking advantage of the offer, the protagonist immediately asked to borrow $1 billion. The request was so ridiculous that Yananiel spat out his drink, asking if he was serious. When Gavin insisted he was, his friend flatly refused, joking that he couldn't get that kind of cash even if he sold his own father, although he humorously added that he might consider it for $500 million before getting annoyed at Gavin's shamelessness. Suddenly, a couple appeared nearby, and a blonde young man was heard inviting a girl to a private room for a movie. Gavin watched them with a grim expression, as Yananiel realized the girl was actually the protagonist's girlfriend. Furious, the friend pointed out that she was cheating on him right in the open. As the couple walked past their table, the girl awkwardly asked what her boyfriend was doing there. Yananiel immediately stood up for Gavin, calling the redhead ungrateful, but she coldly replied that she didn't need to explain the obvious situation. Seeing this, Gavin recalled a bitter memory from the future. During the apocalypse, the blonde man had abandoned her, and although Gavin had treated her like a goddess and saved her, she had eventually betrayed him, leading to his death. Yananiel urged his friend to leave, claiming that the mere sight of the girl made him nauseous, but Gavin remained calm and insisted there was no need to rush. Seizing the opportunity to mock him, the blonde boy labeled Gavin a simp for following Zenia around, while the redhead joined in by humiliating her ex, accusing him of harassment and calling him disgusting. When Gavin simply asked if she was finished with her performance, Zach scoffed, wondering if he planned to use his pathetic devotion to try and win her back. Despite Yananiel's desperate attempts to drag him away, completely confused by his friend's fixation, Gavin requested just 5 more minutes. Zach found the request amusing and remarked that he was curious to see what he could possibly achieve in such a short time. Without a second thought, the protagonist slapped Zach across the face, leaving Zenia worried about her new boyfriend and the entire cafeteria stunned. Furious, Zach demanded to know how he dared to strike him and lunged forward, shouting that he would finish him off, but Gavin was faster and landed a solid kick. While Yananiel cheered for his friend's sudden change in attitude, Zenia rushed to help Zach, threatening her ex that he was a dead man for touching the heir to the dragon group. Zach stood up, boasting about his black belt in Taekwondo and refusing to lose to a punk, but Gavin immediately countered with an uppercut, dismissing him as trash. Internally, the protagonist realized that while the apocalypse had been a disaster, it had at least taught him how to fight. Yananiel asked in amazement when his buddy had become so tough, but Zenia was enraged, screaming that Gavin would regret this and audaciously demanding he kneel and apologize. Having lost his patience, Gavin slapped her as well, asking who she thought she was. Filled with rage, Zach rose again, vowing to crush the protagonist like an ant, but Gavin quickly silenced him with a knee to the stomach and pulled a spray can from inside the bully's jacket. Panic immediately set in as Zach demanded the object back. When the protagonist asked how many girls he had hurt with that spray, Zach tried to play innocent and snatch it, but Gavin was quicker and sprayed the substance directly into his face. As the blonde boy began screaming in pain, a confused Zenia watched him frantically warn her to stay away. The chemical quickly took effect, causing Zach to lose his mind and attack the girl, tearing at her dress right in front of everyone. Despite Zenia's desperate pleas that they were in public and her cries for help, he continued his assault. Watching the chaotic scene, Gavin announced that his 5 minutes were up. He explained to a shocked Yananiel that the spray was actually a potent aphrodisiac the rich kid used on his victims. When Yananiel expressed concern that Zach might call the police, Gavin assured him that there was nothing to worry about. As the heir to a powerful group, Zach was far too proud to involve the authorities and would prefer to seek personal revenge instead. Yananiel eventually accepted his friend's logic, agreeing that someone like Zach would prefer to handle his revenge in secret rather than involving the police. Leaving the cafeteria behind, he asked where they were going next, and Gavin replied that they needed to sell his house immediately. Ignoring Yananiel's protests that the property was the only thing his parents had left him and that real estate prices were rising, they went straight to an agency. Gavin was determined to sell, calculating that the $3 million from the sale would be just enough to stockpile essential supplies for the coming apocalypse. From there, the protagonist dragged his skeptical friend to a massive supermarket to start spending the cash. He immediately stunned the staff by ordering 1,000 bags each of rice, flour, and oil, along with 10,000 cans of food. When the clerk asked if he was sure, Gavin confirmed the order, prompting Yananiel to joke that he must be opening a grocery store. After arranging for the store to handle the delivery, Gavin realized he needed a place to store everything and asked to borrow Yananiel's family warehouse for the incoming goods. Meanwhile, 2 girls from their class noticed him and began gossiping about the earlier cheating incident. Ignoring them, Gavin moved to the electronics section, reasoning that entertainment would be vital for passing time during the apocalypse. His massive purchase delighted the employee, who called him the customer of the year, but it also confused the girls watching him. Seeing him buy a large number of heavy coats, the purple-haired student questioned if he was truly poor, noting that he had already spent over $1 million. They concluded he must be a rich kid in disguise and decided to approach him. As they walked over with overly friendly smiles, Gavin recognized them not as classmates, but as the thugs who had robbed him in the freezing cold of his past life. They made phony small talk and complimented his looks, eventually inviting him to grab a bite to eat. To their surprise, he accepted the invitation, telling Yananiel to go ahead and manage the supplies at the warehouse. The girls secretly celebrated, planning to take their new target to an expensive luxury restaurant to drain his wallet. Once seated at the high-end venue, Gavin looked at the menu and pretended to be concerned about the prices. The girls, however, dismissed the cost and ordered lavish dishes like caviar, lobster, and prime steak. After enjoying the feast for an hour, the purple-haired girl asked how the food was, and Gavin simply excused himself, walking straight to the front desk. At the front desk, the hostess presented Gavin with a bill for $18,000, but he completely ignored it. Instead, he shocked the receptionist by requesting a massive takeaway order of 100 tables containing the exact same dishes, scheduled for pickup in 10 days. When the staff asked if he was serious, Gavin produced his VIP card and offered to pay for the future order up front, driven by his memory of how sick he had become of eating canned food during the apocalypse. The girls watching him pay assumed he was settling their tab and considered him sensible, already plotting to ask for expensive handbags next. However, when the receptionist mentioned the outstanding bill for their meal, Gavin took his card back and coolly informed them that they could pay for themselves. Realizing his funds were running low, he immediately began applying for loans on his phone, celebrating quietly when he secured nearly $3 million, though he knew he still needed more. Just then, his phone rang. It was one of the girls, furious and demanding to know where he had gone. Gavin calmly replied that something had come up, and he was already on his way home, questioning why he should be responsible for the check. When she exploded, claiming he had invited them, he reminded her that they were the ones who had dragged him to the restaurant and insisted on ordering the most expensive items despite his warnings about the price. Desperate and facing a massive bill they couldn't pay, the girl lashed out, calling him a broke loser and a disgrace. To prove he had money, Gavin told her to ask the hostess about the massive catering order he had just placed. Once the staff confirmed the purchase, the girl's tone shifted to begging, but Gavin simply hung up, refusing to baby them any longer. With no money to cover the cost and under pressure from the staff, the purple-haired girl panic-dialed someone named Hunter to teach Gavin a lesson. Meanwhile, Gavin stopped at a lottery shop after leaving the restaurant, recalling a specific set of winning numbers from his past life. He purchased a ticket, excited by the knowledge that he only had to wait 2 days to collect the prize. When he returned to the warehouse, Yananiel complained about being left behind, though Gavin promised to take him out for fun later. The chubby friend still couldn't grasp why they were spending a fortune on supplies, dismissing Gavin's explanation about saving lives during the apocalypse as total madness. Despite Yananiel's skepticism, Gavin assured him that within a few days, he would understand everything. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a group of thugs looking for Gavin Clark. After confirming his identity, Gavin asked if they were Hunter's goons. A bald man wielding a baseball bat accused him of messing with his boss's woman, causing a terrified Yananiel to threaten to call the police. The thugs scoffed, claiming he would break their legs long before any cops arrived, but Gavin simply smiled and remarked that calling the police wouldn't be necessary. The bald thug mocked him as a coward, insisting that fighting back was useless. Yananiel attempted to shield his friend by invoking his father's influential name, but the gang made it clear their target was solely Gavin, not the rich heir. In a panic, Yananiel yelled for the protagonist to flee while he tried to intervene, but he was quickly shoved aside as the bald man swung a baseball bat. Yananiel screamed in terror, yet Gavin easily evaded the slow attack and countered with a crushing kick to the stomach. Seizing the weapon, he struck the thug with full force and shoved the bat into his mouth, shocking the rest of the group with his raw strength. Undeterred, Gavin challenged the remaining goons to attack at once. The blonde leader gave the order, but the protagonist single-handedly took them all down, leaving Yananiel staring in disbelief at this new version of his friend. With his enemies on the floor, Gavin demanded 100,000 from each of them. When one complained about extortion, Gavin struck him with the bat and threatened to break their legs, quickly securing $600,000. He told himself he wasn't cruel, but the harsh reality of the apocalypse had changed him. Keeping his promise of excitement, he took Yananiel to a nightclub. While his friend enjoyed the atmosphere and the dancing women, thanking him for the distraction, Gavin approached the bar and requested to see the boss for a delivery. They were led down a corridor lined with security, causing Yananiel to nervously ask what was happening. Inside, the guards saluted Mr. Lowe, who questioned why the boys were there. Gavin introduced himself, claiming he had goods to deliver. When Lowe noted they were empty-handed, Gavin intrigued him by pointing to himself as the merchandise. However, the mood shifted when Lowe ordered his armed men to capture them. Facing gunpoint, a terrified Yananiel tried to use his father's name again and demanded to know what the delivery was. Gavin calmly revealed that the man trafficked human organs, causing Yananiel to completely panic. Unflinching, Gavin challenged the boss and offered his own body for $10 million. Lowe countered with $5 million, claiming the market was down, and the protagonist agreed, provided he got the cash up front and delivered the body in 3 days. Satisfied with the arrangement, Mr. Lowe called for the paperwork, but when his men produced only a single document, Gavin signaled that his friend was part of the deal too. Yananiel shouted in protest that he wasn't selling anything, but the protagonist ignored his desperation and insisted he was, leading a henchman to force the terrified boy to sign the contract at gunpoint. Once they were safely outside, Yananiel was furious, questioning whether Gavin had any humanity left after betraying him like that. The protagonist tried to calm him down, and even when his friend pointed out the extreme danger of crossing a gang leader, Gavin simply stated that the boss would be history within 3 days. He then invited his skeptical friend to witness the coming apocalypse and led him to a real estate agency to rent a specific mansion. Although Yananiel was confused by the sudden need for a luxury home, Gavin explained that the location held a special significance. He remembered dying there in his previous life and was determined to restart his journey exactly where it had ended. When the agent reported that the owner refused to rent regardless of the price, Gavin escalated his offer from double to 10 times the rate, offering to pay everything up front. This massive sum immediately convinced the agent to secure the deal, with Gavin adding the condition that he must be allowed to renovate the entire property. While waiting in the hallway, they spotted his ex-girlfriend, Zenia, being urged by her mother to pursue Zach. Gavin explained to a confused Yananiel that Zach lived nearby, just as the redhead noticed them and glared with disgust, accusing her ex of stalking her and warning that their previous conflict wasn't over. Her mother joined in, mocking Gavin as a failure with no future, and even threatened to have Yananiel expelled when he tried to defend his friend. Gavin scoffed at their dramatic reaction, but Zenia arrogantly claimed he couldn't possibly afford the rent. Just then, the agent returned to confirm the monthly rate was over $25,000. To the shock of the women, the deal was real, though Zenia vainly assumed he was doing it just to be near her, a level of delusion that baffled both boys. The agent then clarified that, due to the 10 times offer, the initial payment was $250,000. As the mother and daughter stood frozen in disbelief, convinced it was a fake act, Gavin displayed the transfer receipt on his phone, took the keys, and secured permission to rebuild the house. The girl's mother began to question her own judgment, wondering if Gavin might actually come from a wealthy family after all. Meanwhile, the protagonist asked his friend if he had connections to the head of the city's biggest renovation firm. Although Yananiel couldn't understand why anyone would want to remodel a rented property, Gavin cut off his questions, simply telling him to arrange the meeting and promising that everything would make sense by that evening. Using his father's influence, the friend managed to schedule the appointment, for which Gavin thanked him by promising a truckload of instant noodles as a reward. When Yananiel complained about the strange gift, the protagonist assured him that his father would not only love it but praise him for it later. Upon arriving at the renovation company, the receptionist asked them to wait for the boss. By sheer coincidence, the ex-girlfriend and her mother were also in the waiting area, having their own renovation funded by Zach. Noticing the boys, the redhead immediately accused the protagonist of stalking her again, sneering that he should keep dreaming if he thought he could win her back. Annoyed by their constant presence, Gavin wondered why he kept running into these idiots, while Yananiel tried to explain that they were genuinely there for business, only to be scoffed at by the girl. Gavin ignored them and confirmed his appointment with the receptionist, leaving the mother and daughter convinced he was just showing off. When Mr. Zhao, the company boss, finally appeared and asked who his meeting was with, the receptionist pointed toward the protagonist's group, but the two women interrupted, ecstatic. The mother assumed Zach's influence had brought the boss out personally and took the chance to mock Gavin, pointing out that her daughter was getting VIP treatment while he had to wait. Confidently, Zenia stepped forward to introduce herself, but Mr. Zhao looked confused and asked if she had an appointment. When she insisted she did, the man, failing to recognize her, asked if her name was Gavin Clark. Upon hearing her reply that she was Zenia, he abruptly pushed her aside, telling her not to block the way if she wasn't the client he was looking for. Mr. Zhao immediately recognized the protagonist when he introduced himself, though he was surprised by his youth before inviting him to talk in private. Left behind and baffled, the girl's mother watched them leave, while the redhead rationalized that the special treatment was solely due to the rich friend's family connections. Inside the office, Mr. Zhao asked about the project details. When Gavin stated he wanted to renovate a mansion, the boss initially dismissed it as a small job suitable for a director rather than himself, explaining that he only handled major projects. However, Gavin insisted that Mr. Zhao handle it personally, claiming it was indeed a massive undertaking. When pressed for a budget, the young man calmly announced that he was prepared to spend at least 30 million. Floored by the figure, Mr. Zhao could barely believe his ears, and had to ask if the young man was sure he meant 30 million and not just 3. Gavin confirmed the figure, prompting a director to rush into the room, eager to assist with such a lucrative project. However, Mr. Zhao immediately dismissed his subordinate, insisting that he would handle this matter personally. Curious about the purpose of such a massive investment, the boss noted that the money was enough to buy a brand new mansion, but the protagonist simply handed him a roll of paper containing the blueprints. As he reviewed the drawings, Mr. Zhao was startled to see that the design resembled a military bunker. Gavin explained that the budget was flexible and could increase, but his only strict requirement was that the construction had to be finished within half a month. Although the boss remarked that the project looked like a fortress built for doomsday, he accepted the challenge after Gavin confirmed it was indeed for the apocalypse and offered 20 million up front. Witnessing the deal, the chubby friend was flabbergasted by the total expenditure of 35 million and called Gavin crazy. The protagonist dismissed the concern, stating that money would soon be worthless, and revealed that he had even taken out 10 million in loans to fund the plan. Yananiel could only hope that this story about the end of the world was actually true. Just then, the ex-girlfriend reappeared, mockingly asking how much he had spent just to grab their attention. Annoyed, Gavin retorted that his business didn't concern her, and he wasn't trying to impress anyone. The girl's mother then bragged that her daughter had spent 1 million, calling that real power, but Yananiel chimed in to reveal that his friend had just dropped 35 million. Both the redhead and her mother burst out laughing, convinced it was a ridiculous joke. The protagonist then challenged them, asking if they would call him daddy if he was telling the truth. Zenia, believing he only had the 3 million from his house sale, dismissed him as a fool, while her mother eagerly accepted the bet, agreeing to use the title if he really had that kind of money. Suddenly, an employee ran after them to return a contract Gavin had left behind. Seizing the chance to expose him, the mother snatched the paper, but her expression froze in shock as she read the figures. When Zenia scoffed, asking if the amount was so small it left her speechless, her mother pale-facedly stammered that the contract was indeed for 35 million. Desperate to save face, the woman accused Gavin of forging the document to show off, but the employee immediately defended its validity, stating it was signed by the boss himself. Gavin demanded they honor the bet, but when the older woman refused, he lost his patience and slapped her across the face. As Yananiel cheered for the bold move, Gavin decided it was time to leave, ignoring Zenia's furious threats that he would pay dearly for the humiliation. Later that day, the two friends arrived at the mansion Gavin had rented. Yananiel was completely confused, questioning why they were there and what the plan was. Gavin replied that he was finally going to prove the apocalypse was real, though his friend just thought he had finally lost his mind. After waiting outside in the cold for 2 hours with nothing happening, Yananiel began to complain. Checking his phone, the protagonist announced that the moment had almost arrived. Suddenly, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Gavin declared that it was finally starting, although Yananiel, still skeptical, asked if it wasn't just a regular falling star. Gavin clarified that although the actual apocalypse was still 2 weeks away, signs like the bitter cold and falling stars were already visible. When Yananiel panicked, realizing a shooting star was hurtling directly toward them, he screamed for them to run, but Gavin stood his ground. He recalled from his past life that this specific star, which had originally been found by a thief, granted special abilities, so he opened his arms to receive it. Ignoring his friend's desperate cries that he was crazy, the protagonist let the light hit him square in the chest. Yananiel was convinced his buddy had been crushed, but Gavin stepped out of the impact zone surrounded by a powerful aura, declaring that his physical strength had increased 5-fold. When he asked if Yananiel believed him now, the stunned boy stammered, unsure how his friend was even alive. Gavin replied that he was not only alive but significantly stronger, yet Yananiel remained skeptical, claiming he didn't look any different. To demonstrate his new power, the protagonist grabbed his friend by the shoulder and effortlessly lifted the 200-pound boy with just one hand. As Yananiel freaked out, unable to comprehend the feat, Gavin carried him to the edge of the roof. Giving him a scary look, the young man told him to brace himself and jumped off the 30-foot building with his friend in tow. They landed perfectly without a scratch, and after opening his eyes in amazement, Yananiel finally admitted that the jump had convinced him. Meanwhile, in the neighboring mansion, Zenia's mother asked what her daughter was watching. Zenia mentioned seeing the star fall and bitterly remarked that it should have hit her ex-boyfriend instead. Just as her mother assured her that Zach would get revenge, the doorbell rang. Zach arrived, greeting Zenia enthusiastically, but when he noticed her mother lingering, he rudely ordered the older woman to leave them alone. Zenia then revealed that Gavin had moved into the neighborhood, and her mother added fuel to the fire by claiming he was stalking her daughter. Furious that Gavin dared to show his face, Zach pulled out his phone and called a boxer named Biao to deal with him. Zach offered the fighter $200,000 to take someone out, and Biao immediately accepted, promising to finish the job within 2 hours. Stepping into the ring, he announced that he had work to do and needed to wrap things up quickly. Although his opponent, the current champion, grew angry at this arrogance and dismissed him as a cocky rookie asking for a beating, Biao moved faster. With a single clean punch to the jaw, he knocked the champion out, causing the crowd to go wild and hail him as the new king of boxing. Back at the mansion, Gavin described the early stages of the coming Ice Age, leading his chubby friend to mourn the fate of humanity. When asked what he planned to do, a fully convinced Yananiel stood up and vowed to follow his friend's instructions without question. Gavin jokingly suggested that he should go home and sell his father as he had proposed earlier, but Yananiel awkwardly admitted that his dad would never believe a story about the end of the world. However, after Gavin explained that cash would soon be useless compared to supplies, Yananiel made up his mind to bankrupt his family to get what they needed, regardless of the punishment he might face later. Suddenly, Gavin sensed movement outside and silenced his friend, revealing that the property was surrounded. Outside, Biao and his men were preparing to breach the entrance, with one goon raising a giant sledgehammer to smash the door. Just before he could swing, Gavin threw the door open with such force that it knocked the man unconscious. Stepping out with Yananiel, the protagonist demanded to know who they were. Surprised that they had been detected, Biao asked if Gavin was a fighter himself, before the protagonist shocked him by addressing him by his full name, Duan Hubio. While Gavin silently recalled that this man would become a powerful figure during the apocalypse, Biao admitted that Zach had sent him to break some bones. Gavin advised the thug to leave to avoid getting hurt, but Biao, annoyed by the audacity, lunged at him. Gavin easily dodged the attack, commenting on how slow it was. When the boxer tried again, the protagonist spotted an opening and landed a solid blow to his stomach, shocking the other goons who watched their boss stumble back. Recovering, Biao muttered that something was wrong, but refused to give up when asked, insisting that no one could force him to submit. Losing patience, Gavin delivered a kick to the jaw that sent the boxer to the ground. Even then, the defeated fighter stubbornly insisted he wouldn't surrender, unable to comprehend his loss. Finding his resilience interesting, Gavin made an unexpected offer. He would save Biao's sister in exchange for a favor. The mention of his sister left Biao completely stunned, and he demanded to know how Gavin knew about her illness. Gavin revealed that he was fully aware of the terminal illness Biao's sister was suffering from, noting that he knew the fighter only competed to pay for her medical treatments. Filled with sudden hope, Biao asked if it was truly possible to save her, to which Gavin replied that he was the only person capable of doing so, though the choice to believe him lay entirely with the boxer. Convinced by his defeat in combat, Biao surrendered immediately, stating that he trusted Gavin and asking what mission he needed to carry out. The instructions were simple. He was to go after Zach, beat him up, and extract as much money as possible. Without a word of complaint, Biao gathered his men to leave, and when one of the goons questioned if they could really trust this stranger, the boxer simply replied that Gavin was now his only hope. Meanwhile, at the other mansion, Zach assumed Gavin was already in the hospital and decided it was time to enjoy himself. He and Zenia were sharing a private moment in the bedroom when a loud noise ruined the mood, prompting the girl's mother to go downstairs and check the door in annoyance. Upon opening it, she found herself face to face with Biao and his gang, and when she demanded to know who they were, the impatient boxer shoved her aside to force his way in. The woman furiously yelled about their lack of manners, but Biao silenced her with a slap across the face. Hearing the commotion, the couple came downstairs, where Zach asked if the job had been completed and offered a card with the $200,000 payment. Instead of accepting the money, Biao delivered a hard punch to the rich kid's stomach, shocking Zach, who couldn't understand why his hired muscle was attacking him. Biao simply pointed at Zach and ordered his men to attack without mercy, and they began kicking the playboy while he lay on the floor. Desperate, Zach tried to threaten the fighter with his family's influence, causing Biao to signal his men to stop. Thinking his threat had worked, Zach arrogantly gloated that the boxer had made a mistake, but Biao quickly crushed his confidence by revealing that his new boss had ordered them to hang him up and continue the beating. As he was dragged away screaming that they were insane, Zach began to wonder if Gavin was the one behind this. While hanging in the air, the playboy finally admitted his transfer limit was $10 million, which Biao demanded he send immediately. Back at their rented home, Yananiel showed the protagonist a message about a class training session. Gavin initially declined the invitation, but he quickly changed his mind after learning the event was located near North New City. Just as he confirmed his attendance, his phone rang with a call from Biao confirming that he had secured the $10 million from Zach. Later, the scene shifted to a lottery shop where Gavin went to check his ticket, hoping to use the winnings for more supplies. However, he was shocked to discover he hadn't won. He briefly considered the possibility of the butterfly effect, but dismissed it as impossible, reasoning that nothing else in the world appeared to have changed. Realizing he needed to find an alternative way to secure cash for his supplies, Gavin joined the other students the next day for their college practical training. He was quickly confronted by the two girls from the restaurant, who demanded to know how he had the audacity to show his face. When Gavin simply asked why he shouldn't, the one with glasses angrily explained that they had been forced to work for a month just to pay off the massive bill he left behind. Unfazed, the protagonist asked what their problems had to do with him, prompting the girls to switch tactics. Trying to seduce him, they claimed they would do anything if he covered their debt, with the purple-haired girl specifically offering a night together in exchange for $20,000. However, Gavin flipped the script and asked to borrow $40,000 from them instead, leaving the pair absolutely furious. Just then, Yananiel arrived, and the protagonist immediately noticed his swollen eyes. When asked what happened, his friend admitted the swelling was from crying in a desperate attempt to convince his father that the apocalypse was real. Excited by the dramatic strategy, Gavin asked if it had worked, but Yananiel sadly reported that his father had ignored him for hours before eventually giving him a beating. Gavin offered some comfort, telling him not to lose hope since accepting the end of the world had taken time even for him. Their conversation was cut short when a professor ordered everyone to board the bus for the training site. Once they were seated, Yananiel complained about being thirsty, but Gavin didn't have any water to give him. A girl sitting next to the protagonist noticed the situation and kindly offered her own bottle, which Gavin accepted with thanks and passed to his friend. The girl, QQE, then expressed her sympathy regarding Gavin's recent breakup, hoping he would recover soon. He assured her that he wasn't sad at all. In fact, he was relieved to have finally seen his ex's true nature. Although she offered to lend him money after hearing rumors that Zenia was a scammer, Gavin declined, knowing that her family was not wealthy. Yananiel started to tease him about the obvious chemistry between them, but Gavin quickly told him to shut up. When the bus finally arrived, the counselor gathered the group to announce their internship placements, explaining that the assignments were divided across 3 floors, with the first being the worst. As the list for the prestigious 3rd floor was read, the 2 gold diggers celebrated their success, knowing Hunter had pulled strings for them. While discussing how to repay him, they set their sights on QQE, the girl who had helped Gavin. The purple-haired student suggested she was the perfect target because she was a virgin from the countryside with no connections to protect her. The roll call continued with the 2nd floor assignments, and Yananiel grew increasingly frustrated as their names were skipped. Finally, the professor announced that the last 3 students would be sent to the 1st floor. QQE was disappointed, lamenting that they wouldn't learn anything useful there, while the other students mocked Yananiel for ending up in the same boat as the broke guys. Gavin demanded to know the criteria behind the decision, but the counselor dismissed him, insisting that the school's choice was fair and he had no right to complain. When the protagonist bluntly accused him of lying, the professor became angry and threatened expulsion, attempting to justify himself by claiming it was equitable to place a rich student and a poor student in the same group. However, the chubby friend was furious and publicly exposed the man, revealing that the professor had tried to extort his father. As the counselor indignantly called him insolent, Yananiel produced his phone, declaring he had a recording of the blackmail to prove it. Suddenly, another male student intervened, accusing them of crossing the line and disrespecting the professor. The 2 gold diggers quickly joined the argument to defend the corrupt teacher, labeling the trio as ungrateful and unworthy of an internship. Annoyed, the protagonist told the interrupter to shut up, but the bully mocked him, calling him a simp who had lost his mind after Zenia dumped him. Without hesitation, Gavin punched him square in the face. The furious student screamed that Gavin had struck first and lunged at him, but Gavin effortlessly blocked the attack. Shocked by this unexpected strength, the bully stood frozen as Gavin slapped him twice and reminded him that he had been warned to get lost. Terrified, the bully cried out to the professor that Gavin had gone crazy, only to receive another punch for not listening. When the enraged counselor demanded an apology, the young man simply turned around and slapped the corrupt teacher across the face without mercy. Yananiel cheered, finding the scene incredibly satisfying, while the rest of the students watched in disbelief. The counselor screamed that he was kicked out of the program, but Gavin responded with an uppercut, stating clearly that he didn't care. With both antagonists on the floor, the protagonist signaled his friend to leave, but Yananiel hesitated. Worried about what would happen to QQE, Gavin turned and invited the girl to come with them, causing her to blush. Although the gold diggers tried to interfere, claiming they would look after her and warning that Gavin would ruin her future, QQE ultimately decided to stay, saying goodbye and telling the protagonist to be safe while the professor continued to rant about expulsion. Once they were away, Gavin told his friend it was time to handle some real business. They soon arrived at a massive logistics park, which Yananiel identified as the largest in the province. Realizing the implication, the friend asked if the plan was to take supplies from there, but he immediately dismissed the idea as impossible, doubting they could even get inside. Spotting a hiring notice, the protagonist signaled for his friend to come over and check it out. However, when he inquired about the position, the recruiter condescendingly informed him that they were strictly looking for female employees at the moment. While the chubby friend began to panic, asking what their next move should be, Gavin came up with a solution and instructed him to go find QQ to help them out. Meanwhile, the office was buzzing with activity when the girl with glasses whispered to her friend that Hunter had called. Mr. Jiang needed a girl immediately. With malicious smiles, they decided QQ was the perfect target. Approaching her desk, they asked how she was settling in, to which the innocent girl gratefully replied that she was learning things she never would have seen in school. The bullies dismissed her thanks as normal colleague behavior, before the purple-haired one asked if she had a boyfriend. When QQ admitted she didn't, the girl with glasses excitedly offered to set her up with someone wealthy. Although QQ refused, insisting she just wanted to focus on her job, the two ignored her protests, arguing that a rich boyfriend would bring in more cash and forcibly dragged her away to meet him. Upon arriving at a luxurious office building, QQ attempted to flee, but the girls blocked her path, assuring her that the man was a good person. They ushered her into a room where Mr. Zhang was waiting. The older man smiled creepily, commenting on how pure she looked. Pushing the terrified girl forward, the purple-haired student introduced her as his new girlfriend. Satisfied with the delivery, Zhang handed the pair $30,000. As the gold diggers said their goodbyes and told him to enjoy himself, QQ begged them not to leave her, but they simply ignored her pleas and slammed the door, trapping her inside. The repulsive man approached her, offering more money if she served him well. Terrified, the girl backed away and threatened to call the police if he didn't let her leave, but Jiang scoffed that the security guards were his friends and wouldn't help. Cornered, QQ pleaded for her freedom, explaining she just wanted to work in peace. In response, the old man slapped her hand, knocking her phone to the floor, and ominously stated that escape was impossible since no woman had ever left that room unharmed. Just then, her phone began to ring. Back at the logistics park, the protagonist felt the vibration and noticed QQ was calling. He answered, asking what was wrong, but on the other end, the old man stomped on the device, smashing it to pieces before Gavin could hear an answer. Jiang told the girl to accept her fate, promising to make her successful, but QQ refused to give in. Grabbing a potted plant in desperation, she declared that she would rather perish than surrender to him. On the other side of town, the sudden disconnection of the call left the protagonist with a sinking feeling. Realizing that QQ was likely in danger, Gavin immediately rushed back to the location. Meanwhile, inside the office, the young woman attempted to defend herself by throwing a potted plant at the predatory old man. Enraged by her resistance, Mr. Jiang shouted that she needed to learn her lesson and slapped her so hard that she fell to the ground. Upon arriving at the building, the two friends were blocked by a security guard who demanded to know their business. Yananiel tried to use his family's influence to get past, but the guard didn't recognize him and refused to budge. Losing patience, the protagonist shoved the man aside, ordering him to move, and headed straight for the elevators, claiming QQ was on the 3rd floor. When the guard insisted that Mr. Jiang could not be disturbed, Gavin sarcastically retorted that he was Jiang's father and didn't need permission. Confused by the obvious age difference, the guard realized something was wrong and began shouting for backup to stop the intruders. When the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, Gavin found himself face to face with the two gold diggers. Shocked by his presence, they asked what he was doing there, but he ignored them and grimly demanded to know where QQ was. The purple-haired girl tried to dismiss him, claiming he had no right to ask since he wasn't an employee. However, when Gavin repeated the question with a threatening tone, she attempted to stand her ground, insisting this wasn't the place for a scene. Without hesitating, the hero slapped her, sending her to the floor. Her friend with glasses was outraged that he dared to hit a woman, but she quickly received a slap as well. With both girls now terrified on the ground, Gavin asked for the 3rd time where their colleague was. Trembling, they pointed toward a door, revealing she was in Mr. Jiang's office, though the purple-haired girl tried to warn him about the boss's powerful connections. Ignoring the warning, the protagonist kicked the door open with full force. Inside, he found QQ screaming for help, while the old man shouted for the intruder to get out. Gavin demanded that he let the girl go immediately, but an annoyed Jiang simply asked if the young man knew who he was dealing with. Unintimidated, Gavin grabbed the creep's finger and twisted it, causing Jiang to scream in pain and desperately call for security. Annoyed by the noise, Gavin silenced him with a kick straight to the face before turning to QQ to ask if she was okay. Relieved, the young woman told him that he had arrived just in time. At that moment, the security team finally arrived, demanding to know who was causing trouble. Mr. Jiang scrambled to his feet and ordered his men to eliminate the intruders, a command that delighted the two gold diggers who felt the protagonist deserved a beating. However, their celebration was cut short when one of the guards was thrown through the air, crashing directly into the girls. Within seconds, Gavin had incapacitated the entire security squad, leaving the women in shock. Cowering on the floor, the terrified boss asked what more the young man wanted. Gavin simply replied that he would ensure the old man never thought about women again, before delivering a crushing blow to his groin. With Jiang incapacitated, the protagonist turned his terrifying gaze toward the two girls. Although they tried to shield themselves, pleading that he shouldn't hit women, Gavin ignored them and slapped the student with glasses across the face, followed immediately by the purple-haired one. He warned them that he had only spared them from serious injury because they might still be useful, then gathered his friends to leave the wrecked office. Behind them, one of the girls attempted to help the boss and offered to call the police, but Jiang slapped her away, demanding to be taken to the hospital instead. He then grabbed his phone and called a contact, desperately asking for help to destroy the boy. Once they were safe outside, QQ thanked the protagonist but worriedly admitted that she had lost her internship and didn't know how she would find work. When Gavin offered to help her secure a job, she eagerly accepted, and the group returned to the logistics park where the day had begun. QQ was surprised to learn he wanted her to work there, pointing out that the open position was for a warehouse manager while she held a degree in finance. However, Gavin encouraged her, insisting that all work was valuable and she could shine anywhere. With the recruiter growing impatient about closing time, Gavin urged her to apply, and she agreed to take the position. After saying goodbye and promising to visit her in a few days, Gavin and Yananiel left the park. Yananiel remarked that only a fool would accept a security-type job when they came from a finance background, but the protagonist explained that it was precisely because of that foolishness that she had secured a crucial opportunity. As they headed home, however, they were suddenly ambushed. A gun was pressed against the protagonist's head with a command not to move. It was Mr. Lowe's men, forcing both friends to raise their hands in surrender. The thug announced that the 3-day deadline had expired, meaning their bodies were now the property of his boss. Although Yananiel was confident he could easily take the men down and questioned why they were going along with this, Gavin insisted they surrender, claiming the real show was just about to start. When they arrived at a deserted factory in the suburbs, the goons ordered them out of the van. Yananiel nervously pointed out their isolated location, irritating one of the captors who shouted at them to hurry inside. However, the protagonist moved with sudden speed, disarming the man and seizing his weapon. Without a second thought, he fired a single shot through the center of the thug's head, killing him instantly. The remaining guards immediately went on high alert, but Gavin was faster, taking them all down with terrifying precision. Stunned, Yananiel stared in amazement and praised his friend as a sharpshooter. Gavin handed him a magazine of ammunition for self-defense, silently recalling that since he had lacked special powers during the apocalypse, he had been forced to master marksmanship to survive. When Yananiel awkwardly held the gun and admitted he didn't know how to use it, the protagonist asked if he played shooting games. Upon hearing that his friend was a pro gamer, Gavin suggested he simply pretend he was playing one of those games to boost his confidence. The scene shifted to the warehouse interior, where workers were unloading a truck stamped with the Ziwei Biotech logo. Yananiel immediately recognized the brand and questioned why one of the world's top 3 bio corporations was operating in such a place. Gavin explained that while the company was hailed as humanity's savior in his past life, he now suspected they were far more complex and dangerous than they appeared. Suddenly, 2 uniformed guards spotted the intruders and shouted a challenge, but the protagonist reacted first, gunning them both down. He checked one of the bodies and found an ID card, confirming that they were indeed Ziwei employees. Further inside, a blonde woman was concluding a deal with Mr. Lowe, expressing the corporation's satisfaction with the fresh parts he had provided. Lowe replied that the honor was his, mentioning that 2 more live subjects were arriving to complete the batch just as he noticed the boys approaching. He introduced them to the woman as the final pieces of the set, ironically asking if she was pleased that they were still alive and kicking. The woman, however, looked intrigued and asked why the merchandise was carrying guns. Mr. Lowe was shocked to realize they were armed, but before he could speak, Gavin shot him without hesitation. The bullet struck Mr. Lowe square in the knee, causing him to collapse and scream in pain as he frantically ordered his men to capture the intruder. Gavin immediately opened fire, systematically taking down the thugs. Watching the display of marksmanship, the woman couldn't help but be impressed, while the wounded boss screamed for his men to capture them. Instructing Yananiel to stay hidden, the protagonist continued to engage the remaining enemies. Enraged that anyone dared to challenge him on his own turf, Mr. Lowe rescinded his earlier order to harvest their organs and commanded his men to simply crush them. However, Gavin's speed and precision were overwhelming. Despite the guards and the Ziwei executive shouting and returning fire, the last of the henchmen soon collapsed right at the woman's feet. With the room cleared, Gavin and his friend approached the 2 survivors. When the woman demanded to know what they wanted, Gavin aimed his weapon at them, retorting that he was the one asking the questions. Mr. Lowe, annoyed by the boys' audacity, questioned if a punk like him was even qualified to know their business. In response, the hero fired another shot, striking the trafficking boss in the shoulder. Staring coldly at the man now kneeling and clutching his wound, Gavin told him to repeat himself. Trying to maintain his composure, Mr. Lowe warned that he wasn't easily scared and that the boy had no idea who he was messing with. Instead of finishing it himself, the protagonist turned to Yananiel and ordered him to kill the boss. The chubby friend was completely shocked by the request, but Gavin maintained a cold, serious expression and insisted he follow orders. Seizing the moment of hesitation, Mr. Lowe grabbed a fallen gun from the floor and cursed at them, but Yananiel reacted faster. Squeezing the trigger with his eyes closed, he fired a single shot that pierced the trafficking boss's forehead, leaving Mr. Lowe with a look of stunned disbelief in his final moments. Seeing the body on the floor, Yananiel began to panic, realizing he had just taken a human life. Dismissing the dead boss as trash whose knowledge paled in comparison to hers, Gavin turned his attention to the Ziwei executive. Surprised that he knew of her importance, she asked who he was and how he knew her name. The protagonist replied that his identity didn't matter, though he taunted her by suggesting she could call him Daddy if she insisted. Furious at the insolence, she yelled at him, but Gavin remained unfazed and simply shot her in the leg. As she collapsed, screaming in pain, she tried to threaten him with the consequences of attacking a Ziwe executive, but he ignored her words and shot her in the other leg without hesitation. Approaching her, he made it clear he had no interest in empty threats. Desperate and terrified, the woman begged him to stop, revealing that the organs provided by Lo were being used for research into human evolution and bioweapons. She then offered to take him to the facility if he agreed to spare her life. Upon realizing the connection, Gavin experienced a flashback of the Manus war god, understanding that the creature was the result of these experiments, which had begun long before the apocalypse. The woman was stunned by his specific knowledge of such a classified project, asking how he could possibly know their secrets. Meanwhile, Yananiel pried open a nearby crate and screamed in horror to find it filled with human organs. Seeing the situation escalate, the executive attempted to recruit the protagonist, promising him unimaginable wealth and power if he joined Ziwe Biotech. But Gavin immediately rejected the offer, stating he had no interest. Desperate to survive, the woman begged him not to kill her, insisting she could still be useful. When he questioned her utility, she attempted to seduce him with a suggestive remark about her oral skills. The tactic failed completely, as Gavin put a bullet in her head, scoffing that her mouth clearly couldn't stop a bullet. He then searched her body and retrieved a VIP access card for the Ziwe Biotech headquarters. Elsewhere, Mr. Jiang was furious about the incident at the biotech firm, demanding to know who was bold enough to cause such trouble. As an investor, he insisted he had a right to know the truth, and that they couldn't hide it from him. Hunter arrived to meet him wearing a vengeful expression, and the old man ordered him to deal with a youth named Gavin. Hunter confirmed he already had a personal score to settle with the protagonist and promised to deliver one of his hands within a few days. Back at the mansion, the contractor informed Gavin that the main structure had been reinforced to a level that not even a tank could breach. He added that the internal renovations, including the ventilation and underground water systems, would be completed within a week, for which the protagonist expressed his gratitude. Just then, a woman approached and introduced herself as Aunt Liu from the residence committee. After welcoming the new neighbor, she invited him to join the neighborhood group chat to facilitate communication. Once he accepted, she noticed several cardboard boxes left over from the construction and asked to take them, assuming he had no use for them. Gavin agreed that he didn't need the boxes, but explained that it wasn't convenient for her to enter the property at that moment. Aunt Liu insisted, claiming she would go get a cart, which forced Gavin to be firmer and ask her not to delay the construction work. She called him stingy, and although he diplomatically offered to bring the boxes to her house the following week, she refused. She demanded to take them immediately, fearing that someone else would sell them before she had the chance. Losing all patience, the protagonist snapped and shouted at the woman to leave immediately. Taken aback by his outburst, she confronted him, demanding to know why a punk like him was using such foul language against people. Gavin didn't back down. Instead, he bluntly threatened to give her a severe beating if she didn't get out of his sight. Grumbling as she walked away, the woman complained about how disrespectful young people were these days, and ominously warned that he would eventually get exactly what he deserved. Meanwhile, Zach was busy arranging a hit, offering $500,000 to a gang leader known as One-Eyed Dragon. Although the mercenary initially tried to decline the payment, claiming it was his duty as a member of the vast dragon group to serve the young master, Zach insisted on paying because this was a personal vendetta. He emphasized that his only requirement was for Gavin Clark to vanish from the world without leaving a single trace of evidence. One-Eyed Dragon flashed a wicked smile, introducing himself as a professional hitman and guaranteeing the job would be done that very night. Watching the assassins depart, Zach muttered to himself that Gavin had no clue about the immense power he was up against, convinced he could eliminate him with a mere snap of his fingers. Later that night at a luxury hotel, the assassins' team gathered outside. The leader verified that Gavin was definitely inside the presidential suite before ordering his men to remain vigilant and ensure the target didn't escape. Unaware of the danger just outside his door, the protagonist was lounging on the sofa, satisfied that everything since his rebirth had followed his plan perfectly. He mused that the most critical phase was only 3 days away, and its outcome would determine everything. His relaxation was interrupted by a noise from the hallway, where One-Eyed Dragon was creeping toward the suite with his weapon drawn. Realizing that Zach's hired muscle had arrived, Gavin decided to play along, but as he listened to their movements, he realized a second group was also approaching. It was Hunter's gang. When one of Hunter's men scoffed at the target, the boss quickly corrected him, warning that Gavin had already defeated and robbed another group and shouldn't be underestimated. To reassure him, a henchman displayed a tranquilizer gun, claiming they were fully prepared this time. Hunter then issued his final command. They were to beat Gavin severely and slice off one of his ears to present to Mr. Jiang as proof. Inside the suite, the protagonist smiled, realizing the night was about to get interesting. He decided to enjoy the chaos and switched off the lights. Interpreting the sudden darkness as a sign that their target was asleep, One-Eyed Dragon ordered his team to storm the room immediately. Simultaneously, Hunter's gang made the exact same assumption and moved in from the opposite side, leaving both groups completely unaware that they were converging on the same spot in the dark. It wasn't long before One-Eyed Dragon spotted a silhouette. He signaled his men to halt and aimed his weapon at the figure, who was actually Hunter, ordering him to freeze. Confused and believing he was addressing the target, Hunter retorted that he was the one who shouldn't move an inch. Annoyed by this perceived arrogance, One-Eyed Dragon demanded to know how a mere punk dared to speak to him that way. Hunter, equally furious, shouted back, asking if the other man had read the script wrong since he was supposed to be the one making threats. Dismissing him as just a talker, One-Eyed Dragon vowed that he wouldn't leave the room alive. Hunter, convinced that the boy was pretending to be a hitman, finally lost his temper and commanded his men to eliminate him. At the same moment, One-Eyed Dragon ran out of patience and issued the same order to his own crew. Chaos erupted as the two factions opened fire in the pitch black, each side convinced they were engaging the target and his reinforcements. Subordinates from both teams screamed in panic, warning their bosses that the enemy had significant backup. Safely hidden away, the protagonist watched the mayhem with a grin, content to let the fools destroy each other. Once the intense gunfire subsided, One-Eyed Dragon leaned against a wall and accidentally flipped the light switch. As the room illuminated, he began to celebrate his victory, only to be interrupted by a wounded Hunter lying on the floor. Shocked, Hunter asked what the hitman was doing there, while a confused One-Eyed Dragon recognized Hunter Walsh and demanded to know where Gavin was. When Hunter yelled that he was there for the exact same reason, the two leaders realized they had been played. Furious, One-Eyed Dragon screamed in anger, deducing that Gavin must have escaped long ago. 3 days later, Yananiel approached the protagonist with an update. He revealed that Counselor Q Changdong had pulled strings to get Gavin expelled from school. However, Gavin simply laughed off the bad news, remarking that a diploma would be worthless once the apocalypse began. Despite this, Yananiel remained frustrated, admitting that he couldn't stand the counselor's smug attitude as he bragged about the expulsion in the class group chat. Confident that he could handle the situation, the protagonist turned his attention to the class group chat. There, Counselor Q Changdong had just publicly announced Gavin Clark's expulsion, citing disruption and assault as the reasons. While the bully Wong celebrated the news, the counselor took it a step further by openly mocking Gavin in front of everyone. Gavin responded with a serious expression, posting a picture of a middle finger and bluntly calling the counselor an idiot. Furious at this audacity, Q Changdong retorted by labeling him an unemployed bum and warning him to watch his back. However, Gavin immediately escalated the conflict by sending a mass message formally reporting the counselor for a long-term affair with Director Lee's wife, even listing their meeting spots and surveillance footage as evidence. Yananiel was stunned by the revelation, asking how his friend could possibly know such damaging secrets. Smiling, Gavin explained that in his previous life, he and the counselor had been trapped in the school together during the apocalypse. Once societal norms collapsed, Q Changdong had confessed everything. Panic instantly set in for the counselor, who frantically ordered the administrator to disband the group and threatened severe consequences for anyone who leaked the chat logs. Enjoying the chaos, Yananiel laughed and decided to upload the screenshots to the school forum immediately. Shortly after, Gavin announced it was time to leave for some important business. As they walked, he asked if Yananiel's father still refused to believe their warning. Yananiel confirmed that his dad was on the verge of committing him to a mental hospital. Gavin reassured his friend that once their current task was finished, he would personally visit Yananiel's father and make him believe everything. Later, they stood in front of a house that Yananiel noted looked quite wealthy by the neighborhood standards, wondering what big event could possibly happen there. Their arrival coincided with the angry shouts of a man inside complaining that he had run out of alcohol again. The interior revealed a grim scene. A drunkard sat amidst a sea of empty bottles, while a young girl was trapped in a cage in the corner. When the man glared furiously at her, she refused to look away, staring right back at him. Enraged by her defiance, he hurled an empty bottle at the cage and threatened to rip her eyes out if she continued. He berated her as a brat who caused nothing but trouble, complaining that he had already squandered her mother's entire dowry. With a wicked smile, he declared that he intended to sell the family home, but not before selling her first, reasoning that she was worth at least enough to buy him a few more drinks. With that, the man yanked the cage open, grabbing the girl by her hair and screaming for her to get out. He admitted that he had beaten her mother to death for refusing to buy him alcohol and threatened to inflict the same fate on her if she dared to disobey. In response, the girl bit his hand, causing him to roar in fury. He raised his arm to strike her, yelling that she would join her mother today. But before the blow could land, the front door was kicked open. Gavin and Yananiel stood in the doorway, their expressions serious and ready for a fight. Still holding the girl, the man stood up and demanded to know who they were, to which Gavin simply retorted, "What do you think?" A flashback revealed the man's identity as Feng Ku, a despicable thug who, in the original timeline, had gained a hyperspace ability. Although he initially became a national hero by transporting government supplies at the start of the apocalypse, he ultimately betrayed everyone, fleeing with a massive shipment. This act of theft led to the starvation and freezing deaths of 1 million people. However, karma eventually caught up with him. He perished in the claws of an ice demon, causing all the stolen supplies to vanish forever. Back in the present, Gavin was surprised by the girl's presence, realizing he had never heard of her in his past life. Mistaking the intruders for human traffickers, Feng Ku offered to sell the girl for an extra $100, casually adding that if they had arrived any later, he would have beaten her senseless. Yananiel exploded with rage, calling him a beast, which confused the drunkard. When Yananiel repeated the insult, declaring him worse than a pig or a dog, Feng Ku scoffed at the perceived hypocrisy, accusing Yananiel of being a self-righteous trafficker. Yananiel vehemently denied this, insisting he wasn't a despicable person like him. Annoyed, Feng Ku grabbed a bottle and threatened to crack Yananiel's skull for causing trouble, but before he could attack, Yananiel fired his gun, shooting him squarely in the leg. As Gavin praised his friend's improving aim, Feng Ku collapsed, clutching his wound and demanding to know who the hell they were. Yananiel warned that he wouldn't let a scumbag like him get away with his crimes. Seizing the distraction, the girl suddenly grabbed a broken bottle and smashed it over Feng Ku's head, shocking both Gavin and Yananiel with her ferocity. Bleeding and enraged, Feng Ku screamed in disbelief that the witch had dared to attack him. Without giving him a moment to recover, she struck again. Even as he lay injured on the floor, Feng Ku threatened to skin her alive, but the girl, eyes filled with pure fury, raised the broken bottle with both hands for a final strike. She began beating him relentlessly. When Yananiel attempted to intervene, Gavin stopped him, instructing his friend to let her handle it. The protagonist realized that stopping the girl now would actually ruin her life, as she needed to release the overwhelming hatred she had been holding back. Consequently, she continued her brutal assault until the broken bottle in her hands was completely drenched in blood. Once the deed was done, she stood trembling with rage beside Feng Ku's body. Yananiel, shocked by the violence, shouted that the man was dead, but Gavin coldly replied that a person like that deserved his fate. Checking the time, the protagonist warned that a major event was approaching and instructed his friend to help the girl clean up and calm down while he headed to the roof. High above the building, Gavin watched a meteor shower streak across the night sky, fixing his eyes on one star that burned much brighter and larger than the rest. A smile spread across his face as he realized the greatest opportunity before the apocalypse had finally arrived. Opening his arms to the heavens, he allowed a descending golden light to envelop him, absorbing the meteor's energy. Moments later, he shouted in triumph, celebrating the acquisition of the power he had been waiting for. With this new ability, his consciousness floated into a massive hyperspace the size of dozens of football fields, confirming that he could now store an unlimited amount of supplies. Returning to reality, a noise from the street below caught his attention. He looked down to see a police car parked in front of the building, where a handcuffed bald man was pointing out the house to the officers, claiming it was the spot where Feng Ku planned to sell a girl. The lead officer immediately ordered his unit to prepare to storm the location. Inside, the girl had changed into clean clothes, prompting Yananiel to comment on how cute she looked now that she was cleaned up. However, the mood shifted when Gavin returned to warn them that the authorities were outside. Yananiel panicked, realizing they were trapped with a dead body and weapons, but the protagonist calmed him down, explaining that while running might have been their only option before, the situation had changed. With a subtle gesture, Gavin used his new hyperspace ability to make Feng Ku's body vanish into thin air, leaving Yananiel staring in shock. Seconds later, the police kicked down the door, ordering everyone to freeze. The lead officer pointed his weapon at the group and demanded to know which one of them was Feng Ku, but the handcuffed informant shook his head, stating that none of them was the man they were looking for. Turning his attention to the young men, the officer asked why they were there. Lying smoothly, the protagonist introduced himself as Gavin and claimed to be the girl's distant cousin checking in on her, while Yananiel added that he was just a classmate tagging along. Finally, the officer knelt down and gently asked the little girl for her identity, to which she softly replied that her name was Zixi. Pointing at the protagonist, the officer asked Zixi if she truly knew him. The girl corroborated Gavin's story, confirming that he was indeed her cousin and that her mother had mentioned him before. Satisfied with her answer, the policeman said his goodbyes, instructing the group to contact him immediately if they found any leads on Feng Ku. As soon as the authorities left, Yananiel breathed a sigh of relief and suggested they get out of there quickly, celebrating their narrow escape. However, just as he turned to go, Shixi stopped him, making him realize they had almost forgotten about her. Worried about her fate now that Feng Ku was gone, Yananiel looked to his friend for a solution. Gavin turned to the girl and simply asked if she wanted to come with them. When Zixi nodded in agreement, Yananiel insisted they take her along, and Gavin accepted, though he warned that he wouldn't support any freeloaders. To test her utility, he asked if she knew how to prepare instant noodles, and when she confirmed it with an excited smile, the deal was sealed. As the trio walked down the street together, a hungry Yananiel suggested they get hot pot, asking Shixi if she could handle spicy food. The story then shifted to 3 days prior to the apocalypse, as Gavin and Yananiel walked toward a luxurious mansion. Yananiel confessed he was still nervous, but Gavin reassured him, insisting there was nothing to fear and that they had to convince his father that day no matter what. Inside the house, Yananiel's father was reading the newspaper and angrily yelled at them to stop talking nonsense and leave him alone. Despite Yananiel's desperate attempts to explain that the ice apocalypse would arrive in 3 days, the older man only grew more annoyed, ordering them out so they wouldn't disturb his tea time. To prove his claims, Gavin used his hyperspace ability to make the teacup vanish instantly from the table. Yananiel's father was completely baffled by the disappearance, but even when Gavin explained that this was the superpower he had been talking about, the man remained skeptical, accusing them of using cheap magic tricks to fool him. Gavin then escalated the demonstration by making the sofa disappear, causing the older man to tumble to the floor. Even then, he refused to believe, claiming they were too naive to trick him, and challenged the protagonist to make everything in the room vanish. Without hesitating, Gavin wiped the room clean, leaving it completely empty of furniture. Standing in the vacant room, Gavin smiled and asked if he finally believed. Suddenly, the father turned and slapped his son hard across the face. When a confused Yananiel clutched his cheek and asked why he did that, his father explained that he needed to ensure he wasn't dreaming, finally admitting that he believed everything. With just 2 days remaining before the ice apocalypse, the scene shifted to Yananiel receiving a bank notification for a transfer of $760 million. Bursting with excitement, he announced that his father had finally kept his promise and sent the funds. Gavin immediately split up their responsibilities, instructing his friend to focus on purchasing cold weather gear and other essentials, while he took charge of inspecting the mansion and attempting to secure weapons. Upon arriving at the newly renovated property, Gavin found it transformed into what looked like a true, impenetrable fortress. Mr. Zhou, the contractor, soon appeared to report that all construction was finished exactly according to the protagonist's specifications and asked if the work met his standards. Smiling, Gavin expressed his complete satisfaction and praised the boss for his thoroughness. Mr. Zhou admitted that this had been the most challenging project his company had ever undertaken, explaining that he had personally supervised the entire process to ensure that, with enough supplies, one could safely live there for a lifetime. Gavin shook his hand and promised to transfer the final payment immediately, but as Mr. Zhou turned to leave, the protagonist stopped him to offer a final warning. He advised the contractor to stay indoors for the next 2 days and stock up on as much food as possible. When the confused boss asked if a typhoon was coming, Gavin confirmed that a rare, once-in-a-century superstorm was approaching. Deciding to heed the advice, the exhausted man agreed that it would be a good opportunity to get some rest. Shortly after, a fleet of huge trucks pulled up to the mansion, delivering a massive haul of goods. Yananiel hopped out of one of the vehicles, proudly announcing that he had returned with the best and most expensive items available. Gavin directed him to move everything inside so he could store it all in his hyperspace. Nearby, an elderly woman and her grandson watched the commotion, with the grandmother wondering aloud if they were opening a supermarket in their home. Spotting a picture of sweets on one of the boxes, the little boy asked for a treat, and the woman lifted him up so he could snatch a lollipop from the top of the supply stack. Amidst the activity, Yananiel approached Gavin with a troubled expression, claiming he had run into a serious problem. When Gavin asked what was wrong, the chubby friend desperately complained that it was actually impossible to spend all the cash, lamenting that he hadn't even managed to burn through 100 million yet. Gavin handed his friend a list of addresses for several large granaries, instructing him to buy every bit of grain available. He was driven by a memory from his past life where a group of villains had stolen those specific resources, and he was determined to cut them off this time around. His planning was interrupted when a delivery worker reported a problem with the final batch of crossbows. An elderly woman was blocking the path. Upon arriving at the truck, Gavin found Aunt Lou using a utility knife to pry open a box while her grandson impatiently screamed that he wanted to eat whatever was inside immediately. Approaching her with a stern expression, the protagonist demanded to know what she was doing. Aunt Lou turned with a fake smile, explaining that since he had bought so much, her grandson simply wanted a lollipop, and she asked if he minded. Gavin gave her a cold stare and bluntly replied that he did indeed mind. Annoyed, the woman called him stingy and claimed the candy should count as an apology for their last encounter, even going so far as to demand he leave the boxes for her. Losing patience, Gavin told her to get lost, which caused her to explode with anger. She cited her position as vice director of the neighborhood committee, claiming she had the right to take things from anyone and accusing him of ruining the community's harmony. Ignoring the tension, the grandson climbed onto a crate to celebrate retrieving the candy. Gavin shouted for the woman to get the boy down, but the spoiled child refused, calling him a villain and threatening to destroy him. Just as Gavin rolled up his sleeves to intervene, the grandmother warned him to stay back. However, the boy's jumping caused the lid to collapse, sending him tumbling into a box filled with crossbow bolts, several of which pierced his backside. As the boy screamed in pain, his grandmother rushed to pull him out while he continued to cry about his injury. Gavin watched with a satisfied smile, remarking that it served them right. Furious, Aunt Lou accused him of causing the injury and threatened to return for compensation before dragging her grandson away. Meanwhile, watching from a distant balcony, Zenia and her friend witnessed the chaos, leaving the redhead to question why Gavin was stockpiling such a massive amount of supplies. Yang Zaking, Zenia's best friend, commented that Gavin must be crazy for stockpiling so many supplies in such intense heat, questioning if he wasn't worried about everything spoiling. The ex-girlfriend dismissed the concern, assuring her that Zach would take care of him, and simply invited her friend to head to the beauty salon. The narrative then shifted to the logistics park with only one day remaining before the apocalypse. Yananiel was in high spirits, celebrating the fact that they had successfully spent all their money to acquire 5 entire granaries, securing enough food to last a lifetime. Gavin told his friend that their next move, after meeting with QQI, was to collect every bit of that grain. When they found the girl, she greeted Gavin happily. Upon being asked about her recent days at the park, QQI replied that the work was going great, and she had even been promoted to warehouse supervisor, though she was eager to know when she could leave. When the protagonist informed her that she could go the following day, she was thrilled and offered to quit on the spot. However, Gavin stopped her, explaining that he needed her to handle one last task, securing the warehouse keys for a visit he planned to make that very night. Shocked by the request, the girl asked what he intended to do there so late. Avoiding a direct answer, the young man promised to explain everything later and instructed her to wait for him inside the warehouse without telling a soul. Left alone, QQI grew thoughtful and began to suspect the protagonist's true intentions. Later, inside one of the granaries, a staff member informed the duo that the food was ready for inspection. Gavin dismissed the site manager, stating that his own people would handle operations from that point on. As soon as the man left, Yananiel excitedly declared that it was time to begin. Gavin activated his hyperspace ability, instantly collecting the supplies. Witnessing the process, his chubby friend was amazed at how the mountain of food vanished in a split second. The protagonist explained that anything stored in the hyperspace remained in its exact original state, leading Yananiel to ask if time effectively stopped inside that dimension. Gavin admitted he wasn't sure yet and would need to investigate further. Suddenly, the site manager returned to retrieve a forgotten item. Stepping back into the warehouse, he froze in absolute shock, wondering if he was hallucinating as he stared at the empty space where a mountain of grain had stood just moments before. Having cleared out the granaries, the protagonist headed for the logistics park and knocked on the warehouse door where Kui was waiting. She opened it, greeting him with a hint of awkwardness, and he immediately warned her that what she was about to witness might be shocking, insisting she remain completely silent. When she agreed, he asked if she was ready to begin. Misunderstanding his intentions, Chukui closed her eyes in embarrassment, seemingly expecting a romantic moment. Noticing her distraction, Gavin called her name, telling her to stop daydreaming and follow him, which snapped her back to reality as she hurried to keep up. They stopped before the massive shelves, which were packed to the brim with supplies. As Gavin reached out, he calculated that this batch would bring his accumulated resources to an astronomical figure. In an instant, everything vanished, leaving the shelves magically bare. Panic set in for Chukui, who screamed and demanded to know how the goods had disappeared and if he was responsible. Promising to explain everything later, the protagonist insisted they first clear the remaining warehouses. Later, inside the surveillance room, a confused Chukui asked what they were doing there. Instead of answering verbally, Gavin used his ability to disable every security camera in the park with a single gesture. He then urged her to leave, assuring her that all answers would be provided once they returned to safety. Back at the mansion, which was now fully prepared as a shelter for the final night before the apocalypse, little Jixi served Kukui a cup of tea. When the young man asked if she truly believed his story about the end of the world, she confirmed she did, leading Yananiel to smile and remark on her unconditional trust in Gavin. The protagonist then gathered the group to announce that the apocalypse would begin the following day, issuing a strict rule that no one was to leave the house from that moment on. However, when Chukui mentioned she had one final matter to attend to, he granted her permission, provided she returned before noon the next day. As the countdown to the ice apocalypse finally hit 0, the scene shifted to a large office building where One-Eyed Dragon was explaining his failure to Zack. He claimed his team had encountered another hit squad targeting Gavin, resulting in accidental friendly fire, but promised that such a mistake would not happen again. Fed up with the constant failures, Zack finally lost his patience and decided to handle the matter personally. He grabbed a gun and rounded up his henchmen to accompany him. Meanwhile, Chukui was out on the streets completing her final task before the end of the world, feeding a group of stray cats and dogs. She sadly bid the animals farewell, explaining that she wouldn't be able to provide for them anymore because of the coming apocalypse, and urging them to learn how to survive on their own. Watching her from a distance, One-Eyed Dragon pointed out to Zack that since Gavin had been holed up in his fortress, getting to him directly was nearly impossible. However, assuming the girl was Gavin's girlfriend, the thugs suggested kidnapping her as bait to force the protagonist out of hiding. Back at the mansion, a phone call left Yananiel in a state of pure panic. He rushed to Gavin with the terrifying news that Zack had captured Chukui and was demanding he come alone to rescue her. Enraged by the situation, the protagonist declared that Zack was asking for trouble and seemingly wouldn't live long enough to witness the apocalypse. When Gavin arrived at the designated abandoned factory, Zack mocked him for being foolish enough to show up alone. Ignoring the taunts, the protagonist cut the conversation short and sternly demanded that he release Chukui immediately. Zack signaled his men to let the girl go, but as she ran desperately toward Gavin for safety, the playboy called him naive and fired his gun directly at her. Although Chukui panicked seeing the bullet coming, Gavin reacted with lightning speed, pulling her into his arms and dodging the shot by a mere fraction of an inch. Zack stood in disbelief that they had managed to avoid the bullet. Holding the girl close, Gavin asked if she was okay. Terrified, Chukui warned him that the enemies were armed and urged him to flee, but he simply smiled and reassured her that there was no need to be afraid because he would take care of the rest. Turning his attention back to the playboy, Gavin announced that while he had intended to let him live a few more days, he would now end him sooner than planned. Furious, Zack ordered his men to torture him rather than letting him off easily. One of the thugs stepped forward, promising to deal with the protagonist, but Gavin instantly knocked him out, sending him flying against a wall before asking if anyone else was eager to meet their end. The display of raw strength left the remaining henchmen stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Undeterred, One-Eyed Dragon signaled for more men to attack, prompting 2 of them to charge with everything they had. Gavin evaded them effortlessly. In a swift motion, he seized an attacker's arm, neutralized the knife with his bare hands, and turned the weapon on the thug, stabbing him in the leg. Spinning around, he inflicted similar wounds on the other 2 assailants, sending them crashing to the floor in agony. Watching the violence unfold, Chukui stood frozen, unable to believe the immense power Gavin possessed. Zack began to panic, confused as to how the protagonist had acquired such skills, but One-Eyed Dragon calmed him down by reminding him that they still held the advantage of firearms. Leveling his weapon at the protagonist, the gang leader challenged him, daring him to try dodging a bullet. However, before he could pull the trigger, he was struck in the chest by a shot and stood completely stunned. Wearing a victorious smile, Gavin revealed his own gun, noting that he had simply been faster on the draw. Seeing One-Eyed Dragon's body hit the floor, Zack fell into a state of disbelief, while Kyukoi was horrified to witness the protagonist take a life right before her eyes. Terrified, the playboy turned and sprinted toward the exit, desperate to escape. He didn't get far, as Gavin fired a precise shot that struck him in the leg, preventing his getaway. Walking over to the fallen rival, the protagonist ironically asked if he really thought he could run away. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Zack screamed that he was the heir to the dragon group and that Gavin couldn't touch him. Ignoring the threat entirely, the protagonist shot him in the other leg without hesitation, coldly replying that he had just touched him, proving he wasn't afraid at all. Realizing he was completely cornered, Zack admitted defeat and told Gavin to name his price. When the protagonist demanded an absurd sum of 1 trillion, the playboy was shocked and angrily accused him of joking, insisting that no one could possibly pay that much. Mocking him for being too poor to afford the price, Gavin delivered a kick to his face to teach him a lesson. Although the defeated playboy began begging for mercy and pleading for the assault to stop, Gavin ignored his cries. He continued the beating, shouting that he had warned the coward he would end him that day. Suddenly, a police car arrived on the scene, and an officer screamed for everyone to freeze and stay where they were. Gavin seized Zack by the collar, demanding to know if he was the one who had summoned the authorities. Wearing a mocking smile, the playboy admitted that calling the police had been his backup plan, boasting that Gavin could no longer kill him and would instead spend the rest of his life rotting in prison for public assault. Losing patience with the taunts, Gavin simply aimed low and shot the rich kid in the groin. Zack immediately collapsed, screaming in agony that his jewels were crushed and his future happiness ruined. As officers rushed in ordering him to drop the weapon, Gavin calmly explained that killing Zack would be too easy. He turned to the law enforcement agents and assured them that there was no way he would be caught that day. Although he raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, he began a countdown instead of complying. The moment he whispered that time was up, the atmosphere shifted. An officer aiming at him froze in shock as he realized snow was falling. The entire squad looked up in disbelief, mouths open, struggling to understand how it could be snowing in the middle of summer. Within seconds, the sunny sky vanished behind a sudden, violent blizzard as the weather underwent a drastic transformation. Temperatures plummeted so fast that the officers began shivering violently, screaming about the cold. Nearby, one of the injured henchmen panicked as ice began to form over his open wounds. On the ground, Zack begged for assistance, terrified that he was freezing solid, but Gavin just watched him with a look of triumph. Seeing the suspects turning into ice, the lead officer frantically ordered his team to save them. Ignoring the chaos, Gavin grabbed Kyukoi's hand, confirming that the apocalypse had truly arrived and urging her to move before it got colder. When an officer tried to block their path by pointing a gun, Gavin offered a piece of advice. He should lower the weapon immediately, or the freezing metal would destroy his hand. A moment later, the officer screamed in desperation, dropping the firearm as his fingers lost all feeling from the cold. Before leaving, the hero crouched beside Zack to ask what he thought of the situation now, reminding him of his earlier promise that he wouldn't be caught. The playboy cried out that his legs were turning to ice, but Gavin simply told him to enjoy the apocalypse. He then walked away with the girl, leaving Zack to his fate while the crowd around them panicked, screaming about the disaster that threatened to freeze them all. Dressed in warm winter clothes, Chukoi admitted she could hardly believe his predictions had actually come true, but Gavin ominously replied that this was merely the beginning and conditions were bound to get worse. When she asked with a serious expression how long the ice apocalypse would last, the young man claimed he didn't know, though privately he recalled that in his past life, the freeze had persisted for a full year without end until the moment he died. As chaos began to take hold of the city, people started looting clothing stores. One man threatened to call the police, only for a looter to retort that legal threats didn't matter when they were about to freeze to death. Hyukui expressed her fear regarding the collapse of social order, to which the protagonist added that it wouldn't just be order that vanished, but people's humanity as well. Suddenly, 2 thugs armed with knives surrounded the pair, demanding they hand over their warm clothing. Unfazed, the hero stared at them coldly, remarking that they must have a death wish and ordering them to get lost. While one thug grew furious at this arrogance and urged his partner to attack, Gavin instantly knocked the charging attacker unconscious with a single, clean punch. He then drew a gun and leveled it at the remaining man's head. Terrified, the thug froze as Gavin ironically asked if he still found him arrogant. In a panic, the man quickly insisted he wasn't arrogant at all, claiming instead to be very humble. With the situation resolved, they returned to the mansion, which was now blanketed in snow. Inside, the chubby friend was in high spirits, celebrating the weather while the group enjoyed a delicious hot pot. During dinner, the protagonist issued a strict warning that they were not to open the door for anyone from that point on. Meanwhile, the TV news reported on an unexplained global cold wave, with the UN urging citizens to maintain order. Glancing at his phone, the protagonist smiled, noting that the neighborhood group chat had become quite lively. In the chat, residents were panicking and speculating about the disaster, with some advising others to stock up on resources. However, Aunt Lou interrupted, telling everyone to trust the government and stop causing trouble by hoarding supplies. Gavin decided to join the conversation, sending a message advising the neighbors to gather as much food as possible. Annoyed, Aunt Lou called him a punk and told him to watch his mouth, insisting the blizzard would end soon, but Gavin simply dismissed her as an idiot. 3 days later, with snow still falling heavily, Yananiel reported that the temperature outside had plummeted to 60 degrees below zero. While Kyukoi worried about the many people who hadn't managed to store food in time, the protagonist remained unconcerned, simply looking at his phone with a smile while his friends fretted over the situation. Residents in the group chat began to complain that the cold wave showed no signs of stopping, with one member specifically calling out Aunt Lou regarding her previous promises. She replied that she was freezing as well and announced her plan to organize a committee to inspect everyone's supply reserves. Moments later, a knock sounded at the protagonist's door. When he asked who was there, Aunt Lou and 2 men outside claimed they were a community group bringing warmth and told him to open up. However, the hero refused the offer with a smile, noting that it was already quite warm inside. Despite her insisting on her authority as a committee member, the young man refused to open the door, using the freezing weather as his excuse. Furious at the rejection, Aunt Lou accused him of defying the organization and shouted for him to open the door immediately. She arrogantly remarked that he should know his place, but the protagonist quickly corrected her. He wasn't defying the organization, he was defying her specifically, adding that she was an idiot. Enraged, Aunt Lou called him a scoundrel and complained that he was getting on her nerves. When one of the men asked what their next move should be, she decided to inspect the other houses first, admitting she urgently needed to find supplies for her grandson. Safe inside the mansion, the protagonist reflected on how quickly the malicious nature of humanity had surfaced in just 3 days. Meanwhile, at Zenia's mansion, her mother was in a panic, complaining that they only had enough food left for 3 days and asking where Zach was. The redhead explained that the roads were completely blocked, but when her mother asked how they would survive, Zenia told her not to worry since they still had money to buy supplies. She then took to the chat group, announcing she was out of food and asking if anyone had items to sell. A neighbor offered 3 pots of noodles and 5 cans of porridge. Zenia initially offered 50 and 80 for the items, but the seller raised the price to 100 and 200. Desperate, she accepted the deal, instructing him to deliver the goods and letting everyone know she was willing to buy from others as well. Observing the transaction, the protagonist noted that Zenia was smart enough to secure supplies while she could. Just then, Kyukoi called him for dinner. Wearing a wicked smile, the young man thought to himself that the people selling their food now would deeply regret it in a few days. 3 days later, as the snow continued to fall, the temperature plummeted to between 60 and 70 degrees below zero. Inside the house shared by the 2 gold diggers and Hunter, everyone was shivering violently. When one of the girls asked what they would do now that their food was gone, Hunter stood up and declared that he wouldn't wait for his demise, ordering everyone to go out and loot whatever they could find. Spotting a familiar name on his phone screen, one of the henchmen called out to the purple-haired girl, asking if the Gavin he had found was the same target they were hunting. She confirmed his identity, expressing genuine shock that he happened to live in their own community. Seeing an opportunity, Hunter flashed a wicked grin and instructed his team to send a message immediately, ordering Gavin to deliver food to them. Meanwhile, inside the mansion's gym, the protagonist was supervising Sixie's training, encouraging her to maintain her stance for 30 minutes to pass the test. The determined little girl confidently replied that she would definitely succeed. Inspired by her effort, Yananiel decided he should start exercising as well. Gavin agreed, suggesting he train alongside Sixie. Even though his body cultivation technique wasn't perfect, starting now would still put him ahead of the average person. However, the burst of motivation was short-lived. Moments later, Yananiel collapsed on the floor, yelling that he couldn't take it anymore and joking that he needed a lobster to recover from the exhaustion. The session was interrupted when Gavin's phone vibrated with a new message. It was from one of Hunter's lackeys, demanding to know if he was Gavin and ordering him to bring food to their boss. The protagonist stared at the screen seriously before typing a single-word reply, "Idiot." The interaction made him realize that the timeline had shifted, as Hunter and his group had never lived in this neighborhood during his previous life. Back at Hunter's place, the boss asked if there had been any response yet. When the henchman confirmed there was, Hunter demanded to know what was said. Upon hearing that Gavin had simply called him an idiot, Hunter was so enraged that he spat out his drink. Screaming that the guy was asking for a death wish, he ordered his men to grab their weapons and head out to finish him off. At the same time, the situation at Zenia's home was deteriorating. Her mother complained that their food supply would only last another 2 days, and asked when Zach would arrive. The redhead assured her that Zach was coming to deal with the protagonist soon. This mention of Gavin jogged the mother's memory regarding the massive amount of supplies he had purchased before the disaster. Zenia confirmed this, recalling the endless line of delivery trucks she had seen. Although her mother wondered if Gavin had predicted the apocalypse, Zenia dismissed the idea, arguing that a simp like him couldn't possibly know something even the authorities missed. With a scheming smile, the mother suggested they shouldn't let those resources go to waste if Zach was delayed. Agreeing with the plan, the daughter told her mom not to worry, boasting that she knew exactly how to manipulate him into delivering the goods personally. Outside Gavin's mansion, Hunter and his armed gang arrived, with one of the thugs pointing out the house where their target lived. Inside the house, Yananiel spotted movement on the security monitor and panicked, warning that intruders were gathering outside. However, the protagonist calmly reassured him, explaining that it was only Hunter and his gang. Outside, the leader shouted at the door demanding immediate entry, but Gavin stood firm with his arms crossed, stating they weren't welcome and telling the group to get lost. Irritated by the rejection, Hunter threatened to smash the door down, warning that it would be too late to beg for mercy once he got inside. Deciding to teach the thug a lesson, Gavin mocked his foul language and promised to wash his mouth out. He pressed a button, releasing a high-pressure jet of freezing water onto the intruders, causing them to scream in agony. Although one henchman complained he was too cold to move, Hunter tried to order a forced entry to finish Gavin off. However, the freezing temperatures were too much to handle. The men fled, abandoning their weapons, while Hunter screamed a final promise that Gavin would regret his actions. Safely inside, Yananiel laughed at the monitor, celebrating the fact that the scumbags were likely to freeze solid. 7 days into the apocalypse, Gavin announced they were heading out that night, confusing his friend. With a mysterious smile, the young man explained that another meteor shower was approaching. Just as Yananiel began to get excited about the event, Gavin's phone vibrated. He was surprised to see a message from Zenia asking if he was around and stating she wanted to talk. Seeing the screen, Yananiel snatched the phone away, shouting that she was an idiot and there was absolutely nothing to discuss. Over at her mansion, Zenia's mother asked for an update. Full of confidence, the redhead told her not to worry, convinced that Gavin was thrilled to hear from her and would reply soon. However, after half an hour of silence, panic set in, and she couldn't understand why the scumbag hadn't responded. Meanwhile, Hunter's group was suffering. Everyone was shivering and begging for more fire. The boss complained that the weather was unfit for humans and that he had nearly frozen to death, angrily vowing that next time they would break down Gavin's door and throw him into the snow. Back at the women's house, 2 hours passed without a word. Her mother suggested Gavin might still be angry, so Zenia decided to change tactics. She recorded a voice message, using a seductive tone to ask what he was doing and if he was handling the weather okay, certain that he would love it. Surprised by the sudden voice message but feeling bored enough to entertain it, the protagonist smiled and decided to play along with her game. He sent a reply teasingly asking if she was missing her daddy. At first, the redhead and her mother celebrated the response, with the girl boasting that he was clearly still the same old simp. Her mother immediately suggested she seize the moment to ask for food, but Zenia's excitement turned to shock the moment she actually listened to his question. Furious at the disrespect, she threw her phone to the floor and cursed the scumbag. Meanwhile, the mood in the neighborhood group chat was grim. One resident expressed deep regret over selling his food, while another blamed Aunt Liu for advising them against stocking up. In response, the woman announced that the committee would be visiting every home to confiscate excess supplies for equal distribution. Gavin realized she was merely trying to trick the residents into letting her steal their resources, though he doubted anyone would be foolish enough to fall for it. When Yananiel noted how dark it had become outside, the protagonist announced that it was time to move. He reasoned that while he knew the meteors would land within the residential complex, he didn't know the exact impact site, so having more eyes on the ground would improve their chances. Stepping out into the freezing air for the first time since the apocalypse began, the group commented on the harsh weather. Gavin warned them that 2 meteors were incoming and instructed everyone to stay alert and dive for them the moment they appeared. Their search was interrupted when they spotted Aunt Lou and her men patrolling the area, demanding cooperation for their supply collection. The woman complained loudly that her previous stock was gone and her grandson was hungry again, prompting an annoyed Yananiel to call her absolutely shameless. One of her henchmen noticed Gavin ahead, bringing a wicked smile to the old woman's face. She remarked that while he had kept his door shut before, they had finally caught him in the open. Her group quickly surrounded the friends, and Aunt Lou shouted for them to stop. Turning around calmly, the young man asked if there was a problem. She accused him of hoarding truckloads of supplies, a fact Gavin confirmed with a confident smile. Delighted, Aunt Lou declared that this made things easy and demanded he hand everything over to the neighborhood committee. When Gavin asked why he should comply, she insisted it was an official order and that he needed to set a positive example. However, he cut her off, bluntly stating that his supplies were none of her business. When she questioned his lack of moral improvement, he gave her an ironic smile, asking who she was to lecture him and dismissing her concerns entirely. Frustrated, the woman tried to condemn him in the name of the committee, but the protagonist ignored her and signaled his group to walk away. Her men blocked their path with shovels, ordering them to freeze, while Aunt Lou threatened that he wouldn't be leaving unless he surrendered the goods. Finally losing his temper at her audacity, the chubby friend stepped forward and slapped Aunt Lou hard across the face. From the ground, Aunt Lou screamed that he had dared to strike her and commanded her subordinates to arrest them. However, the confrontation was interrupted when Cixi pointed toward the sky, shouting that the meteor had finally arrived. Gavin immediately rallied everyone to intercept it, and when Aunt Liu's men attempted to block their path, he knocked them aside with a single punch, telling them to get lost. Yananiel rushed toward one of the falling lights, celebrating the arrival of his big break as he dove toward the golden glow. Meanwhile, Cixi spotted a second meteor and braced herself to catch it. To the chubby friend's shock, the object seemed to move on its own, flying directly toward the little girl before impacting her and enveloping her in a shroud of golden energy. Concerned, Kyuki rushed over to ask if Cixi was hurt. The girl stood up and reassured her that she was fine, explaining that the meteor seemed to have merged with her body. Suddenly, Kyuki spotted a third object descending and shouted a warning. Wasting no time, the protagonist ordered the group to chase after it. Aunt Lou continued to yell from the ground, accusing them of assaulting an elderly woman and attempting to flee the scene. However, her complaints were drowned out as the meteor slammed into the earth, creating a blast of light that knocked everyone backward. Confused, Yananiel asked why this one had landed, and Gavin explained that meteors hitting the ground contain special items rather than abilities. Approaching the crater, Yananiel pointed out a glowing, amber-like object. Picking it up, the protagonist identified the substance as red spiritual fluid, a rare and precious resource. He explained that its primary effect was to drastically increase a person's resistance to cold. The discovery excited the group, prompting Gavin to decide it was time to return to the mansion. However, their path was blocked by Aunt Lou and her thugs, who demanded money and instant noodles as compensation for the earlier scuffle. The young man simply gave them a look of disdain and dismissed them as idiots. When one of the men claimed he was challenging their authority, Aunt Liu decided to prioritize collecting supplies from other households, vowing to deal with him later. Safely back at the mansion, they watched a news report confirming the global nature of the ice disaster and the government's rescue efforts. Suddenly, the power failed, causing Yananiel to panic as the screen went black. Calmly flipping a switch, the protagonist explained that the public grid was overloaded, but assured them that their backup system could provide power for a century. Gazing out the window, Kyuki worried that survival would be nearly impossible without electricity, and wondered how many would perish. Yananiel advised her not to be naive, reminding her that they couldn't save everyone during an apocalypse, a harsh reality she eventually accepted. Changing the subject, the protagonist asked Cixi how she felt after absorbing the meteor. Smiling, the little girl replied that she didn't feel much different, aside from feeling significantly lighter than before. Confused by the simplicity of her answer, Gavin asked if that was really it, and she excitedly confirmed. To properly test her new ability, the chubby friend suggested she try performing the body-strengthening technique Gavin had taught her. Gavin observed the girl closely and realized that her physical condition hadn't improved at all, leading him to conclude that her new ability had nothing to do with physical strength. He asked if any strange memories had surfaced in her mind, such as sword-fighting techniques or magic spells, but she replied that nothing had changed, finding the whole situation very odd. Since there were no immediate answers, the protagonist decided they would simply have to figure out the nature of her power as time went on. With that matter settled for the moment, he gathered the group to share the spiritual fluid so they wouldn't have to worry about the freezing temperatures outside. Yananiel took his share and drank the reddish liquid in a single gulp, immediately feeling a warm current rush through his body. Gavin explained that while the fluid wouldn't completely block the cold, it would prevent them from freezing to death, even if they stood outside naked for a while. Meanwhile, at the other mansion, the situation was grim. Zenia's mother complained that she was freezing without heat following the blackout. Although the redhead tried to calm her by suggesting the power would return soon, the older woman began to despair, fearing they wouldn't survive if Zach didn't arrive quickly. Furious, Zenia assured her mother that Zach was almost fully recovered and that his first priority upon arrival would be to finish off that scumbag Gavin. Suddenly, the mother noticed something unusual through the window. When Zenia asked what was happening, the woman pointed toward Gavin's house, demanding to know why his lights were still on, while the rest of the neighborhood was in total darkness. She realized then that the young man had been incredibly well prepared, evidently possessing his own power generation equipment. Zenia was overcome with rage, unable to believe her ex-boyfriend was living in comfort during the apocalypse. Seeing an opportunity, the mother urged her daughter to contact him again to see what they could get. Adopting a seductive tone, the girl sent a message asking what he was up to since the power was out for everyone else. Inside his warm, well-lit mansion, the protagonist received the message and smiled, realizing that Zenia was in trouble and had come looking for him again. Deciding to have some fun, he took a picture of their table, which was piled high with food, to show off his lifestyle. The two women excitedly checked the notification, only to see a photo of a feast featuring lobster, steak, and ribs, accompanied by a note saying he had prepared it all simply because he was bored. The sight made them drool, with the mother commenting that she would die happy just for one bite. Desperate, the older woman told her daughter to get food from Gavin no matter what, prompting the girl to send another message asking how he still had so much left when they had already consumed everything they had. The phone beeped again, momentarily exciting the two women, who thought he was finally engaging in conversation. However, their hopes were dashed when they read the protagonist's curt reply. He simply acknowledged the message and stated he was going to eat, effectively ending the chat. Furious at the dismissal, the redhead hurled her phone to the floor, screaming that Gavin was doing this intentionally just to annoy her. Meanwhile, Gavin relaxed on his sofa, noting that his neighbors were becoming increasingly desperate. In the group chat, a starving resident announced his intention to go outside to forage, despite warnings from others about the depth of the snow. From the comfort of his warm home, the protagonist knew that venturing out into temperatures plummeting to 90 degrees below zero was essentially suicide. Regardless of a fortune teller's advice to stay put, the desperate man decided to go alone, leaving the others to simply wish him luck. The situation at Hunter's place was equally dire. His henchmen and the two women were complaining that their food was gone and begging the boss to come up with a survival plan before they starved. Hunter stood up and declared that leaving the neighborhood was far too dangerous. Instead, a wicked smile crossed his face as he proposed a different solution. They would rob Aunt Lou, knowing she had been stockpiling supplies collected for the committee. Unaware of the target on her back, Aunt Lou was busy feeding her grandson the provisions she had taken from other households. The boy selfishly insisted that the food belonged entirely to him and told his grandmother not to eat any. She readily agreed, urging him to eat until he was full. Their dinner was interrupted by aggressive knocking, annoying the woman who demanded to know who was there. Hunter and his armed gang shouted from the hallway, ordering her to open up immediately. Terrified to find a thug like Hunter at her door, Aunt Lou hesitated. The gang leader threatened to smash the entrance if she didn't comply, causing the woman to frantically tell her grandson to hide their food stash. Losing patience, Hunter and his men kicked the door down with full force and stormed the apartment. Inside, a henchman immediately spotted the supplies. The grandson tried to shield the food with his arms spread wide, but Hunter simply smiled and ordered his crew to seize everything. Aunt Lou attempted to intervene, claiming that as the head of the neighborhood committee, their actions were illegal. Hunter scoffed at her hypocrisy, pointing out that she had stolen those very supplies from other residents. As she tried to fight back to protect the horde, a thug shoved her aside to grab a box. When she persisted, another gang member threw her to the floor, telling her to get lost. The spoiled grandson then tried to stop them, screaming that the food was his and threatening to destroy them in the name of the light. Annoyed by the brat's screaming, a henchman slapped him hard across the face, causing the grandmother to scream in horror as she watched her beloved boy get assaulted. Not content with just taking the food, Hunter decided they shouldn't leave empty-handed and ordered his crew to seize the wooden furniture to use as firewood, a move his men quickly praised as brilliant. Left on the freezing floor, Aunt Lou hugged her grandson tightly and screamed at the thugs, accusing them of trying to destroy the boy's life. Elsewhere, Zenia's mother offered some strategic advice, telling her daughter to stop being angry and try acting cute instead, claiming that men were weak when women behaved that way. Following this lead, the girl messaged the protagonist, saying she missed him after all this time and asking if she could come over. To her surprise, Gavin replied with the word, "Okay." Wearing a victorious smile, the redhead celebrated with her mother, boasting that they were finally going to eat well since her ex was clearly still a simp who would do whatever she wanted. Confident in their success, the pair headed to the young man's mansion, where the girl knocked on the door and demanded he open up. Inside, however, the protagonist ignored the noise and continued playing his video game, casually asking who was there. Shivering in the cold, Zenia excitedly identified herself and begged for entry, complaining that she was freezing. Without looking away from his screen, Gavin asked why he should open the door and who exactly had told them to come over. Annoyed by the question, the girl yelled that he had invited her by replying "okay" to her message. With a mocking smile, the young man suggested she must have misread it and told her to check the text again. Confused, the redhead looked at her phone and was shocked to see that the full reply actually read, "Okay in your dreams." Furious, Zenia demanded to know if he was messing with her and if he was going to let them in. Gavin simply replied that he wasn't opening the door. Enraged, the redhead kicked the door with all her strength, swearing she would take revenge and ensure he met a terrible end. Her mother, however, began to despair, wondering how they could possibly get revenge when they couldn't even get inside the house. Zenia then decided on a new plan. She would expose Gavin to Aunt Lou and the neighborhood committee for hoarding supplies. Meanwhile, at Aunt Lou's house, the grandson was complaining about the cold and hunger. Just as the grandmother promised she would find him something to eat immediately, her phone rang. It was Zenia, reporting Gavin for hoarding and urging Aunt Lou to bring him to justice and punish him. In the building's group chat, a neighbor asked about the man who had ventured out to find food. A fortune teller grimly noted that since he had vanished, the situation was likely dire. However, the man eventually resurfaced, reporting that he had nearly died and had lost all sensation in one of his legs. This terrifying account led another resident to conclude that starving to death was a better option than facing the cold. Lying in bed, the hero observed the conversation, realizing that the ultimate test of human nature had finally begun. His thoughts were interrupted when Aunt Lou tagged him in the chat, demanding to know what he planned to do with his stockpile. The mention of resources immediately caught the neighbors' attention, leading them to plead for medicine. Gavin understood immediately that the old woman was weaponizing the entire complex against him to force his submission. In the public chat, she relentlessly pressured him, accusing him of lacking the compassion expected of a college student, an argument that successfully swayed the desperate neighbors to her side. Reading the accusations, the protagonist recalled his past life, where his kindness had been exploited and his food stolen. He swore to himself that he wouldn't make that mistake again. Enraged by his lack of response, Aunt Lou escalated her threats, promising to vandalize his door with paint and curse him daily. She then incited the group, urging all the residents to storm Gavin's house and seize his supplies by force. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Yananiel finished a phone call with his father, assuring him not to worry. When Gavin walked in with a cup of coffee and asked for an update, his friend explained that his father had described total chaos outside, with looting and robbery becoming rampant. Gavin calmly sipped his drink, remarking that this was normal and the disorder would only increase. Despite his parents having supplies, Yananiel feared their home might be invaded. Seeing his friend's anxiety, Gavin asked if he wanted to check on them. Yananiel confirmed he did, noting that the spiritual fluid he drank protected him from the cold now. Smiling, the young man agreed to accompany him, mentioning he had a snowmobile to make the journey easier. Their conversation was cut short by heavy knocking. Checking the security monitors with serious expressions, they saw Aunt Lou accompanied by a large crowd of residents. Gavin noted her persistence, while outside the mob marveled that his house still had electricity. Someone pointed out the steam rising from the roof, a clear sign of the warmth inside. Greedily, Aunt Lou commented that a small contribution from his vast stockpile could save everyone. Watching them, the protagonist scoffed at the idea, thinking they could keep dreaming if they thought they were getting his food. Through the door, the woman shouted her demands, claiming that confiscating his supplies for distribution was a unanimous decision made by the tenants. Speaking through the security intercom, the young man scoffed at the group, questioning if such a small crowd really represented all the residents. The woman, clearly agitated, asserted that as the committee director, she indeed spoke for everyone, and with a defiant smile, demanded he open up. Gavin refused, challenging them to find their own way in if they were so capable. Unfazed, Aunt Lou revealed she had anticipated this refusal and had brought a locksmith, ordering Old Lie to pick the lock. The other residents cheered, already fantasizing about the warm room and delicious food awaiting them inside. However, their excitement was short-lived. The locksmith struggled with the mechanism, admitting he had never seen a lock like this before. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered system that refused to budge. Inside, the protagonist laughed at their futility, knowing his door's security rivaled that of a bank vault. Impatient with the delay, Aunt Liu urged the man to try harder, but his second attempt with a different tool was equally useless. Tired of the game, the protagonist instructed Yananiel to electrify the door, a command his friend obeyed instantly. The moment the locksmith touched the metal again, he received a violent shock and collapsed to the ground. Furious, Aunt Lou screamed that Gavin had trapped the door, but she refused to give up. She ordered Plan B, commanding the group to use a heavy wooden log as a battering ram to smash their way in once and for all. With a loud crash, the residents slammed the log against the entrance, but the fortified door didn't yield an inch. Watching the monitor, the chubby friend complained about their shamelessness, unable to understand why they felt entitled to supplies that weren't theirs. The protagonist remarked that the apocalypse was the ultimate test of character. While some would rather die than do evil, others would kill just to survive. Outside, the physical toll became too much. One resident collapsed from exhaustion, saying he couldn't continue, and soon the others followed suit. One of them pointed out that the door was likely made of a special alloy that was impossible to break. Seeing them worn out, the hero grinned wickedly, deciding it was time to give the invaders a nasty surprise. Excitedly, Yananiel pressed a button to launch their counterattack. Just as Aunt Lou was screaming at the group to stop resting and keep ramming, a stream of disgusting brown liquid sprayed down from above, soaking her directly. The entire group was drenched and immediately confused by the substance. While a furious Aunt Lou screamed at Gavin for throwing water on them, the others quickly realized it wasn't water at all. The foul smell gave it away as a mixture of human waste. Watching their reaction on the camera, the protagonist laughed, telling the old woman she could keep cursing all she wanted because they had plenty more waste to unload. Freezing, stinking, and defeated, the residents finally gave up and retreated, cursing Aunt Lou for dragging them into this mess. At Hunter's house, one of the women reported the failure of Aunt Lou's raid, noting that everyone had returned soaked in waste. Hunter remarked that Gavin clearly had some tricks up his sleeve and possessed impressive defenses. The woman with glasses pointed out that such security proved he was guarding a massive stockpile of supplies, while the other gold digger agreed, arguing that they couldn't just leave him alone. If they could breach his house, the food inside would be enough to sustain everyone without worry. Their leader, citing his past history with Gavin, vowed to finish him off but insisted they needed to prepare thoroughly first. Meanwhile, in the other mansion, Zenia's mother was in despair over the failed attack, complaining that she was freezing. Deciding to try Zach again, the girl called him, but the playboy answered with annoyance, asking why she was bothering him. When she begged him to come rescue her from the cold, Zach told her to get lost, admitting he couldn't even save himself before hanging up. Panic set in for the mother, who feared they had been abandoned. Although Zenia tried to rationalize that Zach must be in trouble himself, the older woman felt they were doomed and wanted to go out to find food. The redhead stopped her, arguing that venturing out would only kill them faster. Desperate and unsure of what to do, the girl listened as her mother suggested she continue begging Gavin, since he was now their only hope for survival. Back at his mansion, the protagonist received a message from Zenia, admitting her mistakes and asking what she could do to earn his forgiveness. Wearing a wicked smile, the young man simply replied that she should call him Daddy. Zenia was furious upon reading the text, wondering what had gotten into him, while her mother complained that his jokes were going too far. However, the older woman urged her daughter to swallow her pride, shouting that there were no buts, and that dignity was worthless when survival was at stake. Adopting a determined look, the redhead decided to play along to trick him, planning to teach him a lesson once she was inside. She sent the message Daddy, which Gavin received with a satisfied smile. The women celebrated, believing he would finally let them in, but their hopes were dashed when he mockingly replied that he didn't have a rebellious daughter like her. Enraged, the girl lost it and began insulting him with every name in the book. At the same time, Hunter gathered his crew. One of his men confirmed that preparations were complete and guaranteed they would get the guy this time. Giving the order, the boss led his group of thugs toward the protagonist's mansion to launch their attack. Inside, Yananiel spotted the intruders on the security camera and immediately warned Gavin that Hunter and his gang had returned. Wearing a confident smile, the hero assured his friends that they would make the intruders regret their actions, proving they weren't easy targets to bully. Outside, the gang leader shouted an ultimatum, giving Gavin one last chance to open the door, but the protagonist merely responded with a mocking grin, dismissing the man as an idiot. Having run out of patience, Hunter declared that time was up and instructed his men to stack firewood against the entrance. Once the wood was in place, he ordered them to douse it in gasoline and burn the occupants alive. Inside, Yananiel panicked at the thought of the house being destroyed, but Gavin quickly calmed him down by explaining that the mansion was built with fireproof materials. Unaware of this, Hunter tossed a lighter onto the fuel with a wicked smile, telling Gavin to prepare for a fiery end. A massive bonfire erupted at the front door, yet after some time, one of the thugs noted that there was no commotion inside. Another henchman pointed out that the fire was having no effect on the building's fire-resistant exterior. Enraged by the failure, Hunter commanded his team to bring up an impact drill to bore a hole directly through the wall. An excited goon grabbed the tool and began drilling while his boss cheered him on. The loud noise frightened little Sixie, who warned that bad men were breaking in, but the protagonist comforted her, promising that they wouldn't be able to enter. With a determined look, Gavin announced that it was hunting time and signaled for Yananiel to get ready. The two friends armed themselves with bows and arrows. Although Yananiel mentioned it was his first time using such a weapon, Gavin assured him that hitting targets at close range wouldn't be a problem. Privately, he reasoned that practicing with a bow was crucial, as the apocalypse would bring supernatural threats that could render firearms useless. Outside, the driller suddenly stopped, telling Hunter that something was wrong. He revealed that he couldn't drill any deeper because he had hit an obstruction. Peering into the hole, they discovered a steel plate and realized that Gavin had reinforced the entire structure. Hunter was furious, wondering how they could possibly breach the house if the walls were impenetrable. Their confusion was cut short when an arrow suddenly struck one of the thugs, knocking him to the ground. A volley of arrows followed, injuring several others and forcing the boss to scream for cover. Filled with rage, Hunter swore he would change his name if he didn't kill Gavin, but his threat was interrupted when an arrow pierced him as well. Screaming in pain, he was supported by his subordinates as they frantically retreated back to their own house. As the rest of the gang fled the scene, the three wounded men left behind cried out, begging not to be abandoned. Observing from safety, the protagonist noted that only 3 remained. When Yananiel asked what they should do with them, Gavin reassured his friend that there was no need to worry. Without medical attention, the men wouldn't last much longer. Although the injured thugs pleaded for their lives, claiming Hunter had forced them into the attack, Gavin simply ignored their excuses and signaled Yananiel to head back inside. Once indoors, Yananiel questioned why he had let the others escape. Gavin explained that Hunter would never return for his subordinates, and given the freezing temperatures, the abandoned men would freeze solid within 10 minutes. Yananiel smiled as he realized the brilliance of the plan, noting that since the gang leader was also wounded, his refusal to return would likely trigger internal conflict within his group. Outside, one of the abandoned men expressed relief that Gavin hadn't killed them outright. However, his companion didn't share that optimism, realizing that their injuries combined with the extreme cold were a death sentence. Desperate, he urged his friend to call Hunter, begging their boss to come back and rescue them. When Hunter picked up, he asked for their location, but the moment the henchmen confirmed they were still outside Gavin's house, the line went dead. Shocked, the man told the others that their boss had just hung up on them. Realizing they had been left to freeze, one of the thugs exploded with rage, cursing Hunter for abandoning them after they had risked their lives for him. In a state of hopelessness, one of the men concluded that their only chance of survival was to appeal to Gavin. Turning back toward the mansion, the 3 began screaming for help, frantically promising to serve as his slaves if he would just save them. Meanwhile, back at his base, Hunter screamed in agony, ordering someone to remove the arrow lodged in his back. When a subordinate yanked it out in one go, the boss howled in pain. Watching the chaotic scene, the 2 women whispered to each other that Hunter had failed yet again, admitting they had severely underestimated Gavin. From the sofa, a suffering Hunter yelled at the girls to stop staring and go boil water to clean his wound. Trying to soothe his temper, they told him not to worry and retreated to the kitchen. Once out of earshot, the woman with glasses asked her friend what their next move should be, noting that Hunter was clearly no match for Gavin. Her purple-haired friend agreed, stating that they couldn't rely on the boss anymore and needed a backup plan. Desperate, the other woman insisted that there was no way out, lamenting that they were trapped with absolutely no food. However, her purple-haired friend came to a realization. Gavin's mansion was currently the safest place in the entire neighborhood. Although the girl with glasses hesitated, reminding her friend of their bad history with the guy, the other woman reassured her, arguing that if they simply apologized, he wouldn't let them die. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Yananiel were preparing 2 snowmobiles. The chubby friend was thrilled, celebrating how much easier the vehicles made traveling through the heavy snow. Putting on his helmet, the hero announced that they were heading out to check on Yananiel's parents. Watching from her window, Zenia's mother was shocked to see them driving snowmobiles. The sight sent the redhead into a rage, and she vowed to take everything the protagonist owned and finish him off once and for all. Navigating through snowdrifts that were already over 6 feet deep, the 2 friends made their way across the frozen landscape. Along the route, Gavin spotted a supermarket and signaled his friend to investigate it. Upon entering, however, they found the place completely looted and empty. Gavin explained that this was normal, noting that it had been nearly a month since the apocalypse began, so everyone's food reserves had likely run out. Suddenly, Yananiel shouted a warning. Reacting instinctively, the young man spun around and delivered a swift kick to a stranger attempting a sneak attack from behind. Yananiel immediately drew his gun, aiming it at the man on the floor and calling him a scumbag for the ambush. The attacker begged them not to shoot, claiming he had no choice because he had a family to feed. The mention of a family surprised Yananiel. To prove it, the man called out to the shadows, and a pregnant woman emerged with 2 young children. He explained that they had eaten all the food in the store and were desperate. Gavin questioned why the man had chosen to attack instead of simply asking for help, a question that left the stranger speechless. Fearing the worst, the woman and children dropped to their knees, begging to be let go in peace. Ignoring them for a moment, the hero called Yananiel to follow him down one of the aisles. As they walked, the chubby friend asked about a strange smell in the air. Gavin grimly replied that it was the scent of blood. Moments later, Yananiel was horrified to stumble upon 2 bloody skeletons lying on the floor. But the hero stared at the grisly scene without emotion, remarking that it was exactly what he had suspected. Overcome by the gruesome discovery, the chubby friend couldn't handle the nausea and began to vomit. Once he recovered, his shock turned into a blind rage, and he vowed to slaughter the scumbags responsible. However, the protagonist challenged his friend's resolve, asking if he really intended to kill the pregnant woman and children as well. When Yananiel insisted that he would only target the man, Gavin pointed out that doing so would effectively sentence the rest of the family to death, since they couldn't survive on their own. Frustrated and desperate, Yananiel punched the protagonist in the shoulder, arguing that these people were animals who had survived by feeding on their own kind. The protagonist calmly explained that in this apocalyptic world, crossing moral lines would become increasingly common. Leaving the supermarket behind, they continued their trek to the home of Yananiel's parents. Upon arrival, the sight of an open front gate sent the chubby friend into a panic, and he began shouting for his family as he rushed in. Inside, a group of thugs was busy celebrating their haul, boasting that the elderly couple had hidden a significant amount of supplies. The excited gang leader declared the raid a success, promising his men an extra chicken leg as a reward. When one of the henchmen asked what to do with the captives, the leader flashed a wicked smile and ordered his men to finish them off. A spiky-haired thug raised his gun, aiming directly at the couple, but Yananiel burst into the room just in time, screaming desperately for them to stop. Seeing her son, the mother screamed for him to run away immediately. However, the blonde thug ignored her pleas and shot her without a shred of mercy. Witnessing this, Yananiel screamed her name in absolute horror. In a final act of protection, his father lunged at the shooter, urging his son to flee, but the annoyed thug responded by firing several shots into the old man at point-blank range. Yananiel cried out in despair as he watched both his parents collapse to the floor. The blonde gunman then turned his weapon toward the chubby friend, declaring his intention to send the entire family to the other side. But before he could pull the trigger, the protagonist intervened, slicing the thug's hand clean off. As the man screamed in agony, watching his severed hand fly through the air, the other gang members turned to the intruder, demanding to know who he was. With a cold stare, the hero identified himself as the Reaper before plunging his knife into the blonde man's chest. Enraged, the gang leader ordered his crew to kill the intruder. 2 thugs charged forward, shouting that he was about to meet his end, but the protagonist was faster. With a swift movement, he disarmed the first attacker. The protagonist's lightning-fast movements left the gang leader and his companions stunned. Panic seized a blue-haired thug who screamed for a retreat, but he wasn't fast enough. The hero struck him down from behind with a lethal blow. With blood splattered across his face, the young man turned to the remaining criminals, warning that anyone who moved would end up as dog food. Terrified, the survivors dropped to their knees begging for mercy, but Yananiel ignored them, rushing frantically to his parents' side. His mother managed to whisper that she was happy he was safe, while his father, using his final breath, issued a grave warning to beware of a man named Lee Sanchin from Mang Village. Moments later, both parents passed away, leaving Yananiel heartbroken and devastated. Consumed by rage, the chubby friend demanded the protagonist step aside so he could handle the prisoners himself. He lunged at the gang leader with a knife, but Gavin intervened before the strike could land. Although the thug desperately pleaded that he was only following orders, Yananiel grabbed him by the collar, cursing him to hell. However, the protagonist stopped his friend a second time, insisting on an interrogation first. With a cold stare, he demanded to know who had sent them, to which the man confessed it was the chief of Mang Village. The name struck a chord with Yananiel, who revealed that his father had once sponsored that very village and that Lee Sanchin had been a former employee. Despite his precarious position, the thug arrogantly boasted that Mang Village was the region's supreme power and warned that no one could cross them and escape. Scoffing at the threat, Gavin ripped the man's clothes off, leaving him confused and exposed. The hero declared that a quick death was too merciful. Instead, a piece of trash like him deserved to freeze slowly. Ignoring the man's pleas for mercy, he kicked him out into the snow. Outside, the thug begged for a quick end, but within seconds, the extreme cold claimed him, turning him into a frozen statue. With the immediate threat neutralized, Yananiel insisted on revenge, urging them to head straight for Mang Village. Upon arrival, they were greeted by a grim sight. Several bodies hung at the entrance of what looked like a heavily fortified stronghold. Yananiel remarked with disgust on the countless crimes the villagers had committed. Their observation was interrupted when two men on snowmobiles approached them. Surprised to see that the enemy also possessed such vehicles, the protagonist watched as a man with a mohawk demanded to know their identity. Gavin coolly replied that they were guests, but the guard clearly didn't buy the lie. Smiling, Gavin lied to the guards, claiming that the village chief Lee Sanchin had personally invited him. The two men were immediately annoyed by the falsehood, revealing that the chief wasn't even there because he had been invited to Otek by Zaiwei. As they drew their weapons to attack, both were instantly struck by precise headshots. The protagonist had drawn his gun and finished them without hesitation. Alerted by the commotion, a voice shouted from atop the fortress, demanding to know who was down there. When the guards spotted the bodies, they flew into a rage, wondering where this troublemaker had come from. Realizing the situation was heating up, Yananiel suggested they retreat to formulate a better plan. Gavin agreed, and the pair sped away on their snowmobiles while the thugs fired at them, screaming for them to stop. Upon returning to the mansion, they found a shivering crowd waiting for them, consisting of Hunter's abandoned henchmen and other neighbors. The group celebrated the young man's return, hoping he had succeeded, but the protagonist was confused by the gathering. When they asked if he had brought back supplies from the supermarket, an annoyed Gavin simply told everyone to get out of his way. One man insisted that Gavin had gone out specifically to find food for them and asked what he had found. The protagonist sharply questioned who had given them that idea. When the neighbor pressed him, asking what he was doing out there if not scavenging for the group, the hero retorted that it was none of their business and shoved him aside. Offended, the man accused him of being rude and having no respect for his elders. A woman then joined the confrontation, pleading to know if he found supplies since they were starving, but Gavin bluntly stated he had found nothing. Refusing to believe him, she demanded permission to search him herself. Having lost his patience, the hero pushed her away and told her to get lost. Yananiel stepped in to back him up, announcing to the crowd that they truly hadn't found anything and that their trip hadn't been for the neighbors' benefit anyway. Desperate, one woman complained that they wouldn't survive without food, prompting another man to declare that they would take the snowmobiles to search on their own. Scoffing at their audacity, Gavin called them absolutely shameless. Unmoved by his insults, the woman demanded that he share his food, citing rumors that his home was well stocked. The rest of the mob quickly agreed, threatening to camp outside his door until he finally gave in. Completely out of patience, the protagonist decided he couldn't be bothered with the crowd anymore and signaled his friend to head inside the mansion. However, a woman grabbed him, yelling that he couldn't leave without providing food for the group. Annoyed by the physical contact, the young man shoved her hard, sending her crashing into the snow. From the ground, she threw a tantrum, accusing him of assaulting a woman and threatening to curse him every single day unless he handed over 10 packs of noodles. The other residents quickly chimed in, arguing that Gavin had crossed a line. Taking advantage of the situation, the shameless woman demanded that he apologize and help her inside to recover. Wearing a dark expression, the hero extended his hand toward her. The woman smiled victoriously, thinking she had won. As she prepared to take his hand, she was already demanding a delicious meal. But instead of helping her up, the protagonist slapped her hard across the face. Shocked, she asked what he was doing, to which the young man replied with a wicked smile that since she had accused him of assault, he was simply fulfilling her wish. He then began to beat the woman as she lay on the ground. Although she begged him to quit, Gavin couldn't care less, asking if she really thought he would stop just because she asked. Desperate, the woman screamed for help from the neighbors as her face began to swell from the beating. Witnessing the struggle, a man nearby shouted to the crowd, accusing Gavin of deliberate assault and urging everyone to gang up on him. A bystander wearing a beanie grabbed the protagonist's arm, questioning his character for picking on a woman. Glancing back, Gavin simply remarked that he would have to pick on him as well. He immediately struck the meddler with a direct punch to the face, leaving him sprawled in the snow. Once his opponents were down, Gavin continued his attack, simultaneously landing blows on two men's heads. The woman watched in shock, unable to find words after seeing such violence. One of the victims tried to protect himself, pleading with the protagonist to stop and confessing that he had been wrong to interfere. Standing over them menacingly, Gavin told them they had brought this on themselves and ordered the group to leave. As they retreated through the snow, someone from the group cried out that Gavin was heartless for leaving them to freeze. Meanwhile, the residents began flooding the apartment complex's group chat with complaints, arguing that the protagonist was hoarding excessive supplies and refusing to help anyone. Gavin relaxed on his sofa while scrolling through the messages, questioning the sanity of his neighbors. The tension rose when a lawyer proposed that Gavin should donate his snowmobiles for everyone's benefit. In response, the protagonist sent a short text asking if he actually owed them any favors. This dismissive reply sparked outrage in the chat, leading the neighbors to conclude that he was completely indifferent to their survival. With an ironic grin, the young man wondered if they expected him to act like their father. Enraged by his stance, one resident suggested they should exile him from the community and divide his resources among the rest. Watching the chaos unfold, Gavin recalled how these same unprincipled people had caused him significant trouble in his previous life, and he resolved to teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. The silence of the room was broken when his phone began to ring on the table. Answering a call from a number he didn't recognize, the protagonist asked who was calling. A man on the other end verified if he was speaking to Gavin, which the protagonist confirmed. When the caller arrogantly asked if Gavin knew who he was dealing with, the young man simply replied that he did not. The man introduced himself as Lee Santian from Mung Village, confidently betting that the hero was terrified to hear his name. Amused by the bravado, Gavin mocked him, admitting he hadn't expected the boss to be so dim-witted. While lifting weights on the other side of the line, an irritated Lee Santian demanded that the kid repeat his insult. Very calmly, Gavin advised the crime boss to stop acting tough and to state his business. With a dark smile, the villain acknowledged the protagonist's courage for taking out his men. Resting his head on his hand, Gavin sarcastically asked if the thug had called just to offer praise. Finally losing his patience, the gang leader screamed into the phone, warning the brat that his time was up for interfering with his crew. The protagonist's expression immediately clouded with rage as he vowed that the villain would pay with his life for the murder of his friend's parents. When the thug demanded to know his location, Gavin didn't hesitate to provide the address of the family village situated on the city's north side. From his makeshift gym, Lee Santian threatened him, warning Gavin to stay put because he intended to force the young man to his knees in submission. Before hanging up, Gavin smirked and retorted that if the gang leader failed to show up, he would be the one considered inferior. Across the city, the muscular crime boss gathered his henchmen, who eagerly asked if they should bring their weapons. The leader commanded them to gear up and recruit more men, noting that their targets were armed and dangerous. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the hero told Yananiel it was time to leave. When the confused friend asked about their destination, the protagonist pulled on his jacket and declared their plan to raid Lee Santian's base. Shortly after, the pair were racing their snowmobiles through the deep drifts. Noticing a structure in the distance, Gavin asked if it had been a police station, which Yananiel confirmed was a significant municipal facility. Realizing the potential for finding weapons, Gavin decided they needed to search the building for firepower. They abandoned their snowmobiles and trudged through the thick snow toward the frozen entrance. Upon reaching the main door, the protagonist shattered the glass with a powerful kick. The sight inside was haunting. Officers remained frozen at their desks, caught off guard by the suddenness of the catastrophe. Gavin remarked on how the government had been unable to respond to such a swift disaster. Navigating the cold hallways, they eventually reached the reinforced door of the armory. Although Yananiel threw his entire weight against the metal, it wouldn't move, prompting the hero to tell his friend to step aside. Gavin drew his weapon and blasted the locks until the heavy door finally swung open. Behind the door lay a massive haul of crates stacked to the ceiling. Yananiel cheered, convinced they had hit the jackpot, especially after they discovered a high-quality sniper rifle. While searching the boxes, the chubby friend found a collection of detonators and showed them to Gavin. Approving of the discovery, the protagonist noted how useful they would be and instructed his friend to take everything. Within seconds, Gavin used his spatial ability to empty the entire room. Just as Yananiel suggested they leave, a voice echoed through the corridor calling out for a boss. Realizing they weren't alone, Gavin wore a confident smile, deducing that others had also come to the station in search of equipment. Illuminated by the light from the entrance, a group of suspicious-looking men arrived at the precinct. One of the subordinates immediately spotted the intruders inside the armory and alerted their leader, Brother Hao. The purple-haired boss gave a sinister smile, remarking that it appeared someone had gotten there before them. However, his amusement quickly turned to disbelief when a henchman shouted in a panic that the entire room had been stripped bare. Suspicious of the situation, Brother Hao glared at the two young men and demanded to know if they were responsible for taking the equipment. Gavin maintained an air of innocence, spreading his arms and sarcastically asking if they looked like they were carrying any heavy gear. While one of the thugs admitted they seemed empty-handed, he insisted on frisking them just to be certain. The protagonist flatly refused, stating there was no way he would allow himself to be searched. Arrogantly, the purple-haired leader introduced himself and claimed they were free to go if they truly were unarmed, though he made it clear he never let anyone leave without a proper pat-down. One of the goons began poking Gavin's chest, mocking his confidence and threatening to beat him to a pulp since he hadn't even found a weapon. Before the man could react, Gavin sent him flying with a devastating kick. Incensed by the attack, Brother Hao ordered his crew to eliminate the duo, shouting that they should be dragged back to be roasted. As the criminals charged down the corridor, the hero calmly drew a handgun and noted that he had evidently been far too kind to them. The sight of the firearm caused the thugs to retreat in terror, with one of them yelling that the boy had lied about being unarmed. With a lethal look in his eyes, Gavin warned that he was about to send them all to their deaths. One henchman desperately raised his hands, pleading for him not to do anything reckless and suggesting they talk things over. Showing no mercy, Gavin pulled the trigger and shot the man directly in the head, killing him instantly. As he blew the smoke from the barrel, he dismissed the man as shameless and declared that his days of being nice were over. Horrified by such cold-blooded behavior, another thug questioned if he really had the courage to kill someone. In response, Gavin fired a decisive shot straight into the man's forehead. Seeing their companions fall, the remaining criminals descended into total panic and tried to flee. Their escape was futile, however, as the protagonist mercilessly shot each of them in the back of the head. Only one survivor remained, who fell to his knees trembling and begged for his life for the sake of his wife, swearing his surrender. Looking down at him with pure contempt, Gavin simply called the man a fool. Without a moment's hesitation, the protagonist pulled the trigger and eliminated the final survivor of the group. As he stepped over the remains of his enemies, he holstered his weapon and instructed Yananiel to keep moving. Miles away, a fleet of snowmobiles battled through the fierce blizzard. Lee Santian had issued a brutal command. No one in the Hu family village was to be left alive. When a henchman inquired if the attractive women should be spared, the boss made it clear that Mang village had no room for useless baggage, ordering his men to dispose of everyone once they had finished with them. His subordinates grinned, confirming their understanding of the rules and boasting that no one was brave enough to challenge their authority. With a sadistic smile, the leader urged them to speed up, noting they were still a few hours away from their destination. From a distance, Gavin and Yananiel observed the convoy disappearing into the horizon. The chubby friend remarked that a direct confrontation would be nearly impossible, but Gavin saw a golden opportunity. He proposed that they attack the enemy stronghold immediately, since the majority of their fighters were currently away. Although Yananiel looked at the high, fortified walls and worried that the gates were securely locked, Gavin remained calm. He produced a bundle of dynamite, making his destructive intentions clear. The main entrance of the enemy base was under heavy guard when the sudden roar of an engine startled the sentries. As a vehicle raced toward them at full speed, One confused thug struggled to see how the snowmobile was operating without a driver. His confusion turned to pure terror when he spotted the massive pile of explosives wired to the seat. A second later, a massive blast shattered the gate, sending concrete debris flying everywhere. Thrown back by the force of the explosion, the surviving henchmen scrambled to their feet, screaming to find out who had the nerve to attack Mang village. Through the thick haze of snow and smoke, Gavin and Yananiel charged into the base on their own sleds. One survivor recognized the pair and shouted for the guards to open fire, but Gavin didn't even slow down. Steering with one hand, he drew his handgun and accurately shot 2 guards before they could pull their triggers. The duo sped across the courtyard, leaving a trail of fallen criminals behind them. As more armed reinforcements poured out of the buildings to stop the intrusion, Gavin stayed ahead of them, taking them all down with a fast sequence of shots. Seeing his comrades fall, one henchman tried to flee to alert the village boss, but a bullet to the leg brought him crashing down. Desperate and crawling through the snow, the man tried to save his own life by lying, claiming he was merely an innocent citizen and not a member of the gang. Ignoring the man's weak attempt to save himself, the protagonist aimed his gun and demanded the location of the base's storage facilities. The prisoner, turned pale by terror, pointed a trembling finger toward a massive building at the rear of the courtyard. After getting the information he needed, Gavin thanked him with a single shot, ending the traitor's life instantly. The pair then stepped inside the enormous warehouse, where they found endless rows of shelves stacked high with crates. As Yananiel marveled at the sheer volume of looted goods the faction leader had accumulated, Gavin celebrated the fact that everything now belonged to them. Reaching out with his dimensional abilities, the hero made a sweeping motion, effectively vacuuming every item in the warehouse into his storage. With the facility emptied, the duo sped away from the plundered base on their snowmobiles. Yananiel couldn't help but laugh as he imagined the enemy leader's reaction to losing his entire stockpile, while Gavin smiled coldly, noting that this was merely the first step in a plan to systematically dismantle the gang. Meanwhile, miles away, the Meng village gang finally arrived at their target, only to discover a settlement buried deep in snow with no survivors in sight. Lee Santian realized with growing fury that he had been lured into a trap. His frustration peaked when his phone rang. Answering aggressively, he was met with shocking news that left him stunned. He immediately commanded his men to turn around and race back to their headquarters. When they arrived, the sight of the shattered front gate served as a grim testament to the raid. Lee Santian stood frozen among the wreckage of his own home, struggling to comprehend how he had been outsmarted. His shock soon transformed into a murderous rage, and he vowed to inflict the most painful fate imaginable on the youths responsible. Bellowing at his subordinates, he gave them a strict 3-day deadline to locate Yananiel's hideout. Back at the safety of the reinforced mansion, which remained unyielding against the fierce blizzard, Gavin was relaxing on his sofa. He had just received a message from a former female classmate wanting to meet, though he had already texted back saying he was too busy. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Intrigued, he checked the security feed as Yananiel announced with surprise that the same women who had previously tried to scam them were now at the gate. The purple-haired girl, shivering violently in the snow, called out Gavin's name and begged for entry. When the protagonist eventually stepped out into the inner courtyard, he met the 2 scammers with a cold, unfriendly stare. Attempting to use her charm, the girl forced a smile and claimed they had simply come to pay him a visit. However, the attempt at seduction fell flat when Gavin asked in a freezing tone if they were finished looking at him. Turning his back on the pair, the protagonist declared that their visit was over and ordered them to leave his property immediately. In a state of panic, as her only hope for survival walked away, the purple-haired girl reached out, desperately crying for his attention. She tried to use their history as former classmates and close neighbors as an excuse, arguing that they ought to support one another. Gavin, having anticipated such a plea, glanced back with a sarcastic smirk and asked what possible value they could offer him. In an attempt to be charming, the 2 women shrank back and offered themselves up, promising to do whatever was necessary to serve him in any way he could imagine. Gavin decided to play along with the offer, stating that from that moment on, he would be the master and they would be his pet dogs. Relieved by the agreement, the purple-haired girl celebrated their new status and suggested they head inside immediately before the cold got to them. However, the hero quickly ruined the mood by pointing toward the exit and commanding the 2 to leave the neighborhood right away to forage for his food. When they looked at him in confusion, he crossed his arms and questioned whether the dogs had an issue following their master's very first order. The girl with glasses began to panic, protesting that a blizzard of that intensity would surely freeze them to death if they attempted to leave. Having no patience for her complaints, the protagonist struck her across the face with the back of his hand, demanding she respect his authority. Clutching her reddened cheek, the young woman was left in shock as she realized the kind, wealthy man they once knew had vanished. Her friend tried to intervene, asking him to stop the joke since he was well aware that finding food in a frozen wasteland was impossible. Gavin's response was equally harsh. He slapped the second woman as well and shouted at them to obey him. With her face stinging, the purple-haired girl stared in disbelief, still struggling to process that he was truly serious about sending them out into the frost. Labeling them both as useless trash, he questioned why they thought they were even worthy of being his dogs if they couldn't scavenge for supplies. Without allowing any more arguments, he turned his back and told them to get lost. Furious, the purple-haired girl insulted the hero, stating that they would never have come to him if they had a way to find their own supplies. Her friend agreed, complaining that they had been slapped for nothing and had completely misjudged how difficult he was to handle. As they worried about their next move, the girl with glasses noted that Hunter's group was also starving and wouldn't survive much longer. Despite this, the purple-haired woman decided they couldn't abandon the gang leader yet because they still required his protection, so she suggested they return. While walking back through the apartment lobby, they encountered Hunter and his henchmen, who demanded to know where they had been. The purple-haired girl quickly approached the leader and informed him that they had gone to see Gavin. She fabricated a story, claiming that because the jerk had injured Hunter previously, they couldn't stand by and do nothing, so they went to give him a piece of their minds. Clearly annoyed by the mention of his rival, the gang leader asked what the protagonist had said. To maintain the deception, the woman claimed Gavin had been arrogant and refused to listen when they tried to demand compensation for the damages the gang had suffered. The girl with glasses joined in, holding her face and begging the leader to protect them, describing Gavin as a monster who would have assaulted them if they hadn't fled. Feeling confident, Hunter told them not to worry, promising that he and the kid were now mortal enemies and that he would definitely finish him off. Hunter turned and questioned where else they could possibly look for food. His companion replied that there was no way out since the snow was blocking everything around them. Hunter shot back immediately, stating that leaving was unnecessary because the entire neighborhood now belonged to them, with the exception of Gavin, against whom they could not yet act. He declared that all other residents must obey them. One of his thugs agreed, noting that all the supplies in the neighborhood were now theirs. He suggested that since they couldn't rob Gavin, they should at least rob everyone else. As time passed, Hunter's group began to take action. At one of the houses in the neighborhood, Hunter led his men and stormed the premises with a violent kick to the door, surprising a couple inside. The man reacted, demanding to know what they were doing there and who had permitted their entry. Hunter ignored his outrage and ordered that all the food in the house be handed over. The man refused, claiming there was no food there and telling them to leave. Without hesitation, Hunter pulled out a sharp knife and plunged it into the man's body. As blood began to gush out, the victim collapsed. The woman witnessed the scene in shock and screamed, calling them murderers. Hunter appeared behind her, pressed the knife against her neck, and repeated the order to hand over the food. After a while, she returned with 4 packages of food. Hunter looked at them and asked if that was all, to which she explained it was the result of great effort and saving, stating she wouldn't survive if she lost it. Hunter showed no interest and ordered his men to move to the next house. However, one of the thugs commented that the men had been holding back for a long time and that the woman was attractive. Hunter simply told them to hurry up and not waste time. Following that, 2 thugs grabbed the woman and dragged her across the floor as she screamed desperately for help. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood group chat, residents reported the robberies and begged for help. Hunter then sent an audio message, declaring control over the neighborhood and demanding that everyone hand over a portion of their food. Gavin followed the events and realized that order in the neighborhood was crumbling, concluding that true chaos was about to begin. One resident tried to reason with Hunter, saying that everyone there was poor and he would gain nothing from them. He suggested that Hunter go after Gavin instead, as everyone knew he had plenty of supplies stored away. Other residents began to support this idea, insisting that Hunter seek out Gavin rather than continuing to attack the rest of them. From her house, Aunt Lou got excited by the idea and reinforced that she agreed with the suggestion. Yananiel observed the situation and grew irritated, noticing that while no one had the courage to face Hunter, they were uniting to pressure Gavin. Gavin, for his part, remained cold and stated that this was just the beginning. In his thoughts, He recognized that these people were cruel, the very same ones who in the end had led to his death. Hunter then declared that he would personally deal with Gavin and invited anyone who wanted to face him together to get in touch, promising to share the supplies afterward. Immediately, several residents volunteered to participate, claiming they were out of food and at their breaking point. One woman justified the decision by saying that Gavin had caused all of this by not sharing his resources earlier. Watching the movement, Yananiel reacted with disdain, but Gavin simply stated that if they wanted to come, let them come, as he was bored and ready to have a little fun with the situation. The scene shifts back to the reinforced mansion, where the atmosphere is thick with tension as dozens of neighbors huddle in front of the gates. Shouting and banging on the entrance, the crowd demanded that the protagonist grant them access to his home. Monitoring the situation on a security tablet, a panicked Yananiel pointed out that over half the residents in the neighborhood had arrived to join the protest. The hero, however, remained completely unbothered. Looking at the screen with total indifference, he dismissed the gathering as nothing more than a chaotic group of troublemakers. Outside, the situation continued to escalate as one resident pointed directly at the camera, labeling the homeowner a selfish individual and insisting that the hoarded food be distributed among them all. Yananiel, unable to stomach the insults, began rolling up his sleeves in a fit of rage, offering to head outside and teach the crowd a lesson. Gavin merely gave a grim smile as he adjusted a massive bazooka, advising his friend that there was no reason to face the freezing temperatures. The verbal attacks from the mob persisted, with another neighbor calling the protagonist a coward for staying hidden behind his walls. The group attempted to blackmail him, arguing that his supplies would eventually disappear and warning him that he would be exiled from the community if he refused to cooperate now. Watching from a distance, one of the henchmen questioned Hunter on whether the owner would actually break under the pressure and reveal himself. The gang leader grinned wickedly, clearly proud of his strategy. He explained that if the target emerged, his men would kill him, but if he stayed inside, the neighbor's growing fury would eventually destroy him anyway. Back at the gates, a resident pointed at the house and called Gavin heartless trash, claiming he was no better than a monster for watching everyone die from safety. His rant was cut short by a sudden, sharp crack that echoed through the air. As the man fell from a direct hit, the crowd was thrown into a frantic panic, unable to comprehend how their neighbor had been killed so abruptly. Meanwhile, positioned at the window, the protagonist admired the rifle in his hands, quietly praising the incredible power and precision of the weapon. As the realization dawned on them that the shots were coming directly from the mansion's owner, the crowd below was seized by absolute terror. Peering through his scope, Gavin announced that he was officially out of patience and commanded the mob to clear off his property at once. This threat enraged an elderly man with a white beard who questioned whether the youth understood that murder was a crime beyond forgiveness. In an effort to prevent the group from scattering, another man urged them to stand their ground, insisting that the shooter couldn't possibly hit everyone simultaneously. He stepped to the front, rallying the neighbors for a desperate charge by arguing that they were doomed to starve to death anyway. Gavin responded instantly, firing a round that struck the bold man squarely in the forehead. Witnessing another person fall, the residents decided the shooter had gone completely insane and began sprinting away to save their lives. As they retreated, they cursed the protagonist's superior firepower, realizing that defeating him would be far more difficult than they had imagined. Watching this failure from a distance, a frustrated Hunter clenched his fists and ordered a retreat to rethink his strategy. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the Jinbi community, the sound of heavy footsteps in the snow announced the arrival of a suspicious new group. Their leader, casually smoking, noted to his subordinates that this wealthy area was undoubtedly filled with resources and ordered them to begin their raid. Armed with a shovel, he directed them to search every house in the sector for food. Eventually, the invaders targeted one of the more upscale houses on the street. Inside, Auntie Lou was trying to soothe her quiet grandson, who eventually broke his silence to whine about being hungry. The old woman proudly produced an ear of corn she had managed to hide from Hunter's gang, but the spoiled boy rejected it with disgust. He complained that not even pigs would eat such things and demanded meat instead. Despite her patience, her grandson threw a tantrum on the sofa, even suggesting with a sadistic look that if there was no meat, his grandmother should cut off a piece of her own flesh to feed him. Frightened by the boy's disturbing words, she tried to laugh it off as a joke, making the excuse that her meat would be too tough to eat. Her attempt to calm him was interrupted by a violent crash as the front door was kicked open. The intruders stormed in, and one thug immediately noticed the corn in her hand, alerting his leader. As she hugged her grandson protectively, the woman demanded to know who they were. The boss introduced his crew, explaining that they had traveled from the nearby Yujing community specifically to find food. Without wasting any time, one of the thugs punched the elderly woman in the stomach, demanding that she surrender all her belongings. As she struggled to catch her breath, she pointed at him in outrage, questioning whether the law had lost all meaning for them to break into homes and rob people so brazenly. The leader, casually smoking, laughed at her naivety and explained that social order had collapsed long ago. In this new world, strength was the only rule that mattered. The woman, now held by her collar, wept as she swore that the corn was the only food she had left. To pressure her further, the gang leader grabbed her grandson and held a sickle to the boy's throat, threatening to kill him unless she cooperated. Seeing the child in such danger, the desperate grandmother reached out and urged the boy to remain calm. The thug ignored her pleas and ordered her to get the supplies immediately, prompting the old woman to offer everything she owned in exchange for the boy's safety. A few moments later, the invaders looked at the tiny bag of food on the table and asked if that was truly everything they had. While shielding the child, the woman confirmed that their private stash had run out a long time ago. Holding the small bag of grain, a blonde member of the gang complained about the poor haul, as he had expected an upscale neighborhood like this to be overflowing with supplies. Frustrated by the lack of food, the leader commanded the crew to move on to the next house. As they sat on the sofa, the woman muttered to herself that the world had fallen into total madness, and the gravity of their situation finally began to sink in. However, the boy quickly broke the somber mood by whining about his hunger again, refusing to believe there was nothing left. He confronted his grandmother, screaming at her and asking if she intended to let him starve to death. Her expression turned grim and sickly as she promised her grandson that she would never let him go hungry, swearing she would find a way to ensure his survival. The scene then shifts back to the exterior of the protagonist's impressive, unshakable mansion. Elsewhere on the block, the Yujing gang had cornered another couple, forcing them to choose between their lives or their food. Holding his wife tightly, the husband explained through tears that they had been robbed so many times, they had nothing left to give. After assessing their empty home, the leader of the invaders coldly stated that they left him with only one option. When a massive axe was raised into the air, the terrified resident panicked and asked what the man planned to do. Introducing himself as Ju Daji, the criminal declared that since he never left a house empty-handed, he would take a part of the man's body as payment instead. A brutal swing followed, severing the man's limb and leaving him screaming in agony as blood splattered across the room. In the neighborhood group chat, panic spread rapidly as residents reported the horrific mutilations and crimes committed by the intruders. Watching the messages on their phones, Hunter's crew became aware of the outside invasion. One of his henchmen declared that they couldn't stand by and let outsiders steal the resources from their own territory. Maintaining his authoritative stance, Hunter inquired if his men had identified the origins of the intruders yet. A subordinate with blue hair clarified that the group consisted of blue-collar workers who, after being stranded by the apocalypse, had seized control of the nearby community. Another gang member noted the high stakes involved, pointing out that traveling between neighborhoods in such extreme cold was essentially a suicide mission, which suggested their rivals were quite dangerous. When asked how they should proceed, Hunter declared his intention to confront the uninvited guests for trespassing on his turf. However, as he attempted to rise from the sofa, he groaned loudly in agony. His men rushed to his side, but the leader simply cursed Gavin, complaining that the injury from their previous encounter was still far from healed. Meanwhile, in Zenia's apartment, her friend provided a grim update regarding the robbers who were currently breaking into homes throughout the area. Nervously biting her nails, Zenia lamented that their situation had gone from bad to worse now that a second group had joined the chaos. Her mother wondered if they could intimidate the invaders by mentioning Zach's name, but the redhead quickly dismissed the idea. She explained that the wealthy heir was currently overwhelmed by his own issues and wouldn't be able to help them for days. Terrified, the older woman began to cry, asking where they could possibly hide to escape the violence, but Zenia ignored her and headed to the bedroom to message the protagonist once again. Back at the reinforced mansion, which remained unyielding against the blizzard, Yananiel asked if they ought to intervene and deal with the neighboring looters. Gavin, however, remained perfectly relaxed, reasoning that there was no need to hurry since the invaders would eventually come to them anyway. Just then, his phone buzzed with a notification. Rolling his eyes, Gavin anticipated another one of his ex-girlfriend's schemes. To his surprise, the message contained a provocative photo of Zenia on her bed, accompanied by a suggestive caption asking if he liked the view. Amused by her audacity, the protagonist smirked and texted back his confirmation. Zenia, believing her charms were finally working, replied directly that if he wanted to see more, all he had to do was let her into the house. She felt confident that Gavin had finally abandoned his tough exterior. However, his next reply was much calmer and more calculating, as he informed her that there was no reason to open the door because excellent things deserved to be shared with everyone. The protagonist went as far as to mock her, remarking that keeping such beauty for himself would only lead the other residents to label him selfish once again. Stunned by this unexpected response, Zenia froze as she struggled to grasp what he meant by the suggestion of sharing the photo. Gavin, however, acted without hesitation. With a quick tap and a simple swipe of his finger, he forwarded the suggestive image directly into the main homeowner's group chat. It didn't take long for the consequences to reach Zenia's home. Her mother burst into the bedroom, frantically demanding an explanation as to why Gavin had just shared her daughter's private photos with the entire neighborhood. On the app, every resident could see the picture accompanied by a sarcastic comment from Gavin, who jokingly asked if they were holding a local beauty contest. The neighbors were ruthless, immediately gossiping and criticizing the girl for attempting to trade her body for survival resources. Fuming with rage, Zenia called her ex-boyfriend and screamed that he must have lost his mind to leak her private photos like that. Leaning back on his sofa and calmly sipping water, the hero merely teased her, asking if she had suddenly decided that her dignity mattered after all. Shaking with fury, the girl yelled into the phone that she would never speak to him again for as long as she lived. Gavin simply smiled and took another sip, pointing out that her promise of silence was exactly what he had wanted all along. Defeated and cursing his name, the girl collapsed onto her bed. Her mother, equally frustrated, noted that they had completely underestimated how heartless Gavin could be. Their despair deepened when a violent pounding suddenly echoed from the front door, followed by a demand for them to open up immediately. Zenia's mother fell into a total panic, realizing that the looters from the nearby community had finally reached their apartment. In the hallway, one criminal threatened to tear the door off its hinges with a pickaxe if they didn't cooperate. Terrified and sweating, the older woman begged for a solution, fearing the invaders might mutilate them if they found no food. With a grim expression and clenched fist, Zenia realized there was no longer any way to avoid the intrusion. Outside, a blonde henchman told his boss that the residents obviously didn't know what was good for them. The boss, scowling, gave the order to break the door down by force. However, just as they prepared to swing, the lock clicked and the door opened from the inside. Wearing a pink coat and a very forced smile, Zenia stood in the doorway, apologizing for the delay and inviting the men in for tea. Surprised by the warm reception, the blonde thug whispered to his leader that the girl was quite attractive. With a wicked grin, the boss asked if she wasn't afraid to be standing face-to-face with dangerous criminals. Adopting the persona of a helpless victim, the girl sighed and blamed the harsh state of the world for her actions, insisting she had been forced by her circumstances. Her submissive tone was well received by the blonde henchman, who seemed to enjoy her words. Finding the situation quite intriguing, the leader commanded his men to enter the apartment and see what they could scavenge. While in the living room, Zenia attempted to use her charm by serving hot drinks and addressing the group leader Drew with a friendly title. However, the atmosphere soured when the blonde man returned from searching the other rooms, informing his boss that he had discovered only a single pack of instant ramen. A nervous Zenia quickly tried to justify the lack of goods, claiming that she and her mother had been without food for several days and were starving. Drew responded aggressively, crossing his arms and explaining that, according to the gang's laws, failing to provide food would cost them a limb. In a desperate attempt to save herself, Zenia fabricated a story about her boyfriend being Zack, the heir to the powerful dragon group. She claimed he would be arriving with fresh supplies at any moment. This mention of the massive corporation caused the leader to pause in shock. Believing she had gained the advantage, the redhead smiled with confidence and reminded them that the company was one of the largest in the province. The strategy failed miserably, however, when Drew revealed with a terrifying look that he and his men were actually the blue-collar employees from that very same corporation. He grabbed the girl by her collar and admitted that while he hadn't planned anything extreme, the fact that she belonged to the wealthy heir made him want to take her for himself. Terrified, Zenia begged him to stop and tried to push his hands away. The ruthless leader then presented her with two grim options. She could either lose her arm or become his woman immediately. When her mother hysterically tried to intervene, arguing that Zenia was a college student who deserved better treatment, the invader responded with a violent backhand. The older woman was thrown to the floor by the force of the blow. Drew stared down at her with pure hatred, asking if these high-class ladies thought they were better than a common worker like him. Fearing for her life, Zenia quickly surrendered and swore that her mother hadn't meant to cause any offense. When asked to make her final decision, the girl abandoned her morals entirely. She praised the criminal as a hero and claimed to have fallen in love with him instantly. Pleased with her submission, Drew laughed loudly and began dragging her toward the bedroom, boasting about finally being with a college girl. As she was pulled away, Zenia glanced back one last time at her mother, who remained sprawled on the living room floor in total shock. The situation grew even darker when one of the other henchmen approached the elderly woman with clear ulterior motives, leaving her stuttering in fear as she asked what they intended to do. Chuckling wickedly, the blonde henchman remarked to his companions that the elderly woman still possessed a certain charm despite her age. Without a hint of shame, the thugs hoisted her into the air, deciding they wouldn't let the opportunity pass. Since their boss had taken the main course, they were happy to settle for the leftovers. The older woman thrashed her arms in a blind panic, screaming at the men and calling them starved animals while demanding her immediate release. As filthy laughter echoed through the apartment, the cruel fate of the opportunistic family was sealed. A few minutes later, the atmosphere calmed as the gang leader, Ju, lit a cigarette in a state of total relaxation after taking advantage of the girl. Wrapped only in a white sheet, Zenia feigned amazement, praising his performance and comparing the experience to a roller coaster ride. Falling for her manipulation, Ju laughed loudly and swore that as long as she stayed by his side, she would live like royalty during the apocalypse. As she dressed in her winter gear, Zenia casually asked how many supplies the gang had actually managed to secure. Ju grumbled in frustration, admitting that he had expected the mansions to be filled with food. But this upscale neighborhood had turned out to be more pathetic than the slums they had left behind. Seductively resting her arms on the criminal's shoulders, Zenia whispered that the real issue was simply that he had targeted the wrong houses. With a look of pure malice and a desire for revenge, she revealed Gavin's existence, claiming he had hoarded enough food to support the entire community effortlessly. The boss was caught off guard by the revelation and questioned whether this story of an infinite stash was actually true. To back up her claims, the redhead winked and added the tempting detail that Gavin even had a snowmobile in his garage. Driven by greed, Ju threw on his heavy coat and declared they needed to rob the protagonist immediately. Once they were outside the apartment complex, Zenia pointed directly at the reinforced bunker, marking the exact location of the frozen treasure. Confident in his success, Ju ordered his crew to march toward the mansion, ready to destroy any obstacle in their path. However, their progress was halted when a deep voice echoed down the street, commanding the blue-collar boss to stop where he was. Annoyed, the invader spun around and demanded to know who was getting in his way. Hunter stepped forward with a scowl, identifying himself as the person who owned that territory. Ju, showing no regard for the local hierarchy, snapped back and asked if crossing borders was really a big enough issue to settle with a fight. Losing his patience, the local leader pulled out his gun and told his rival to do some research before assuming he was a pushover. Energized by the challenge, Ju rallied his men for a brawl, yelling at them not to embarrass him in front of his new woman. Just as the two armed groups prepared to clash, Zenia rushed into the center of the potential battlefield with her arms wide open, demanding that they both stand down. Wiping sweat from her forehead, Zenia stared directly at Hunter and argued that there was no point in them fighting when they both wanted the same thing. Confused by the sudden interruption, Gavin's old rival recognized the girl and asked what she meant by forming an alliance. She gestured expressively, trying to bring the two criminal groups together by reminding them that both had been defeated by the protagonist in the past. She suggested that their best move would be to join forces, eliminate Gavin, and divide his massive stockpile of supplies. Intrigued by her proposal, Hunter smirked and agreed that since his ultimate goal was to crush Gavin, he would allow the rival gang to stay in the neighborhood for a few days. The scene shifts back to the exterior of the reinforced mansion, which remained buried under the heavy blizzard. Hunter decided to offer Judaji a warning, explaining that the protagonist was a dangerous opponent who possessed heavy weaponry and had already inflicted serious casualties on his men. Instead of showing gratitude for the advice, Judaji openly mocked Hunter, calling him incompetent and demanding respect. With a condescending grin, he made fun of Hunter for being afraid of a college student and told him to pay attention if he wanted to see how to actually take someone down. Inside the warmth of the bunker, Yananiel pointed toward the monitors and alerted Gavin that the invaders had finally arrived. As he checked the cameras, the hero smiled darkly, noting that the timing was perfect because they could use the thugs for target practice. He quickly slid several handguns across a table and handed them out, telling Yananiel, Chiukui, and Shixi to each take one. The little girl's eyes sparkled with excitement as she held the pistol, mentioning that she had wanted to know what it felt like to shoot for a long time. Chiukai, however, held her weapon hesitantly and nervously asked Gavin if they were truly prepared to kill people. Looking at her with a serious expression, the protagonist explained that the apocalypse was a brutal reality and that society wouldn't be returning to normal for a very long time. Accepting this harsh truth, the young woman adjusted her stance and gripped the handgun, confirming that she understood what was necessary. Outside, Judaji pointed an axe at the house and screamed for the owner to open the door, declaring himself the new boss of the community. Hunter stayed behind the front lines with a twisted smile, thinking that the group of idiots was essentially signing their own death warrants by getting so close to the entrance. Preparing his shotgun, Yananiel told the girls that it was time to start shooting at their sitting ducks. On the porch, a blonde henchman told his leader that the residents clearly weren't going to open up, calling them ungrateful fools. Infuriated by their defiance, Judaji took a running start and charged the entrance, shouting that he would settle the matter with a kick. He delivered a violent flying kick against the metal gate, cursing Gavin and asking if he really thought he could hide forever. However, the plan backfired completely. The impact sent the boss staggering backward as he clutched his leg, howling in pain as if his bones had just shattered. Recovering his balance, the criminal took a closer look at the entrance and realized the iron door had been significantly reinforced. This obstacle didn't dampen his spirits, however. He declared that they wouldn't be deterred and commanded his men to use their tools to force it open. Just as a blonde henchman stepped forward with a crowbar, the lock clicked and the door unlatched on its own. Assuming the residents had finally surrendered, Ju smirked cockily and remarked that they must have been terrified of his reputation. He continued to boast, claiming that had they delayed any longer, he would have hacked everyone inside into pieces. As the heavy, reinforced door swung open, it revealed Yananiel standing firmly with a shotgun, accompanied by the two armed young women. The intruders stared, and the blonde subordinate immediately pointed out to his leader how attractive the girls were. Watching from the background, Zenia bit her finger in a fit of intense jealousy and hatred. She realized that Gavin had offered shelter to all these people while leaving her to die in the cold, and she silently wished for his destruction. Gazing at the man at the top of the stairs, Judaji asked directly if he was the target they were seeking. The chubby guy calmly replied that he was not. Frustrated, the gang leader demanded an explanation for his presence, but the hero's best friend simply smiled, leveled his weapon, and told them he was there to take care of those idiots. In the neighborhood group chat, residents discussed how a gang had gone after Gavin, claiming he deserved it for refusing to share his supplies. They commented on the group's brutality and concluded that the protagonist was as good as dead. Meanwhile, in front of the mansion, one of the gang members called Yananiel a bastard and ordered him to get on his knees. Yananiel did not hesitate. He reacted immediately by leveling his gun at the man's head and ordering him not to move. One of the thugs nervously alerted the rest that Yananiel was armed, asking what they should do. The leader, irritated by the hesitation, questioned why they were afraid, stating that a single gun shouldn't scare them. Despite being outnumbered, Yananiel stood his ground. The blonde gang member tried to intimidate him, pointing out that he was alone with one weapon against more than 10 people, and declaring that he didn't believe Yananiel had the guts to shoot. Without a hint of doubt, Yananiel pulled the trigger, hitting the enemy right in the center of his head. He called the man an idiot, noting that it was too late for him to regret his words. As the other members screamed in despair over their fallen comrade, the enraged boss ordered an immediate attack. The gang charged toward Yananiel, shouting that they would tear him apart. From a distance, Gavin's ex-girlfriend watched the scene alongside Hunter and asked who he thought would win. Hunter replied coldly that it would be better if they all just died. On the other side, the situation escalated quickly as Yananiel announced that the hunt had truly begun. Another shot echoed and another enemy was hit. In the heat of the confrontation, one gang member managed to sneak up behind Yananiel and tried to grab him, claiming he should have realized that a single gun gave him no chance. For a brief moment, Yananiel was in danger, but before things could get worse, a precise shot pierced the attacker's forehead. The shot came from Shixi, who had appeared as backup. Yananiel acknowledged the help, praising her for the hit. The gang leader realized then that they weren't dealing with just one weapon. Furious, he ordered everyone to charge at once, believing that their numbers would allow them to take control and secure the resources to live comfortably. As the remaining members attacked, Yananiel and Shixi stood side by side, firing at the advancing enemies. As the shootout intensified, Yananiel noticed Kyukui standing still and shouted for her to join the fight. She began to fire, but her shots were inaccurate, allowing some enemies to dodge. The attackers closed in, taunting them and claiming that the end was near. However, a perfect shot suddenly hit one of them in the head, dropping him instantly. Confused, the leader realized someone else was involved and asked if there was another hidden shooter. Looking around, they identified the source of the fire from a high position on the house. It was Gavin, watching everything from a distance while aiming a long-range rifle, revealing that his group was far better prepared than the gang had imagined.